Today we are going to look at these people were eaten alive during safari trips. From a tourist dragged into a river by a crocodile to a guide mauled by a lion after stepping outside the vehicle, these are terrifying real-life stories where adventure turned into a fight for survival.
It was August 3rd, 2014, in the heart of Brazil's Pantanal, where the receding floodwaters left behind slick mud banks and dense reeds. The air was heavy and still, the kind of silence that often comes before something breaks it. Out there in the thick brush, something was indeed watching and waiting. Doug Mallory was a 32-year-old former user experience designer from Boise, Idaho, who had abandoned computer monitors for something more primal. After years trapped behind a desk, he had walked away from his comfortable tech job to pursue his obsession: photographing jaguars in their natural habitat. This wasn't a National Geographic assignment or a well-funded conservation project. Doug financed his expeditions himself, using modest savings and credit cards to chase the perfect shot that would prove predators needed no embellishment, only honest documentation. By his third week in Brazil, Doug had established a routine with his guide Rafael, a weathered local who knew the Pantanal's dangers intimately. They would set out at dawn, moving quietly through the maze of waterways and forest islands, searching for the telltale signs of jaguar presence: tracks, scat, territorial markings. Doug often pushed the boundaries, straying from Rafael's side to get closer shots, tighter angles, more intimate portraits of the wilderness. Rafael repeatedly warned him about the particular female jaguar known to be hunting in the area with a dependent cub, a combination that made her exponentially more dangerous. The ranger station had posted clear warnings about this specific animal: aggressive female with dependent cub in the Corinthoro Bend area. Avoid travel on foot. Female jaguars with cubs represent one of nature's most formidable defensive forces. Maternal instincts override their natural caution around humans, transforming them into relentless protectors, willing to attack anything perceived as a threat to their offspring. Additionally, jaguars have the strongest bite of any big cat, over 1,500 psi, able to crush skulls or turtle shells in one bite. Built for ambush, they move silently through water and brush, striking with sudden lethal force. Doug had read the advisory, but brushed it off as overcautious bureaucracy. That morning, they found fresh paw prints in the mud, water still pooling in the tracks. Rafael signaled caution, but Doug, frustrated by weeks of near misses, moved in front of his guide. He didn't know the jaguar had doubled back hours ago and was already circling downwind. He wanted a ground-level photo framed by golden reeds, sun-dappled water behind. He crouched by the shore, camera up, then disaster struck. The jaguar exploded from cover. Rafael saw the blur hit Doug's back like a hammer. The cat drove him face first into the mud with a soundless pounce, its jaws clamping the base of his skull. There was a sickening crack, then a brief frantic thrashing, boots kicking, arms flailing as the jaguar dragged him backward by the head, spine bent unnaturally. In an instant, Doug was gone. One boot lay half submerged and the reeds were painted in long red smears. A wide drag trail vanished into the thicket, already closing behind him. The attack had been swift and efficient, exactly what millions of years of evolution had designed jaguars to deliver. Unlike the prolonged struggles seen with other predators, jaguar kills are typically instantaneous, their powerful jaws crushing vital structures before prey can even comprehend what has happened. Rafael, unarmed and understanding the futility of pursuit in the dense cover where a protective mother jaguar waited, radioed for help and maintained his vigil at the blood-soaked scene. Rangers arrived 2 hours later with rifles and machetes, following the drag marks for 30 yards before the trail vanished into a trampled clearing slick with blood and scattered fur. Despite extensive searches and camera traps placed throughout the area, Doug Mallory's remains were never recovered. The jaguar had done what jaguars do efficiently eliminated a perceived threat to her cub, and disposed of the evidence in the impenetrable maze of the Pantanal. His water-damaged camera equipment was eventually turned over to the American consulate in Quibah. The final photograph showing only a blurred frame of vegetation, time-stamped just minutes before the attack. A small memorial service was held in Boise, attended by former colleagues and local wildlife photographers who understood the risks Doug had chosen to accept. A Brazilian newspaper printed a brief notice. American tourists believed taken by jaguar near Pacone. No remains found. There were no sensational headlines, no calls for retribution against the jaguar. In the Pantanal, the predator had simply followed its instincts. It was March 4, 2015, during an ocean safari off the coast of Mossel Bay, South Africa. The Indian Ocean was cold and choppy, its gray surface rippling under a heavy sky. Swell slapped rhythmically against the dive boat's hull as it idled near Seal Island. Crew members later said something felt wrong that morning, like the water was holding something back. Haley Zhang, a 27-year-old marine biology graduate student from the University of British Columbia, had traveled halfway across the world for this dive. Her thesis focused on predator-prey behavior in coastal shark species, with a special emphasis on the breaching tactics of great white sharks. Unlike the thrill-seekers who typically filled these excursions, Haley wasn't chasing adrenaline. She was chasing field data. Professors described her as methodical and careful, someone who triple-checked gear and logged everything with precision. The float rig system used on these safari-style tours appealed to her research needs. It allowed surface-level observation of breaching behavior without full submersion in a cage, ideal for filming. She had covered the cost herself using a grant and her savings, arriving in South Africa 3 days earlier to finalize logistics. Her goal was to capture visual evidence of ambush breaches, rare events, but invaluable for her thesis defense. Haley entered the water at 10:20 a.m., wearing a half-dry suit and carrying a single GoPro mounted on the short pole. She was one of 4 guests using the float rig system that morning, tethered to the surface cage, but free to move within a limited radius. Witnesses later recalled that she seemed focused and professional, often turning her attention toward the open water rather than the bait box that typically drew tourist cameras. About 30 minutes into the dive, choppy conditions caused several snorkelers to drift from their positions. In that moment, Haley unclipped her tether to reposition her camera equipment, intending to reattach immediately. But she never got the chance. What Haley understood intellectually but perhaps didn't fully appreciate viscerally was the sheer predatory power she was studying. Great white sharks are apex predators refined by 400 million years of evolution, capable of reaching 20 feet in length and weighing over 4,000 pounds. Their breach attacks represent one of nature's most explosive displays of power, launching vertically from deep water at speeds exceeding 25 miles per hour, their massive jaws delivering a bite force of over 4,000 pounds per square inch. These attacks are designed to kill large marine mammals instantly, preventing any chance of escape or retaliation. The attack came without warning. A 14-foot great white erupted straight up from the murk in a vertical breach, its jaws already open. The impact was violent, an explosion of white water and blood as the shark hit Haley from below, folding her body like a rag doll. Its jaws clamped around her midsection with horrifying force, serrated teeth tearing straight through her wetsuit, skin, and ribs in one motion. The sound was a wet, crunching snap, followed by a scream that cut off almost immediately. For a brief second, both bodies hung in the air, hers limp, the shark thrashing, before crashing beneath the surface in a churn of red foam and scattered gear. There was no struggle, no chance for escape. The attack was over in seconds. Brutal, efficient, and final. Witnesses on the boat described a moment of stunned silence before screams erupted across the deck. The shark surfaced once more, Haley's lifeless form still gripped in its massive jaws, before disappearing forever into the depths. Despite an extensive 48-hour search involving patrol boats and dive teams, no trace of Haley Zhang was ever recovered except for her GoPro float, still blinking its recording light as it bobbed alone on the surface. The camera itself, along with whatever final footage it might have contained, vanished with her into the abyss. The dive company immediately suspended float rig operations and quietly updated their liability waivers. Haley's research materials were returned to the University of British Columbia, where her advisor requested that her unfinished thesis work be archived under her name, a small academic memorial to a promising young scientist whose quest for knowledge had led her into the jaws of the very predator she sought to understand. Her family held a private memorial service in Vancouver, declining all media requests. The chair of her department said simply that Haley had died doing what she believed in. It was November 14, 2013, in the scorched thornveld of Namibia's Okahanja district. A hot wind kicked up dust across the service road as the research team's backup truck idled behind a livestock trailer. What started as a standard wildlife management task was minutes away from turning into something no one would forget. Victor Njenga was a 29-year-old mechanic whose quiet demeanor masked a deep reliability that had earned him respect at the private game reserve near Okapuka. For nearly 4 years, he had worked in the motor pool, replacing axles damaged by rough terrain, rewiring trailer brakes, and refitting tires scorched by the brutal Namibian summer. 3 weeks before the incident, management had promoted him to vehicle escort trainee, a position that offered more field time and better pay. Though it came with new responsibilities, he was still learning to navigate. Victor wasn't reckless or inexperienced. He was methodical, learning through observation and careful attention to protocol. His primary duty was maintaining the secondary vehicle that followed research convoys, a dust-caked Land Cruiser equipped with mounted toolboxes and water barrels essential for extended field operations. He had never handled tranquilizer equipment or dart rifles, nor was he expected to. On collaring days like this one, his role was simple: stay back, observe, and assist with equipment loading when needed. That morning, the research team was relocating a subadult male lion for collar fitting and release. The 3-year-old cat had been tranquilized near a boundary fence and transported in a specialized crate designed for safe handling of large predators. The crate was positioned with its rear gate facing a narrow fire break road, standard procedure intended to limit the animal's escape options should something go wrong. As the team prepared for the collaring procedure, they noticed the lion beginning to show signs of consciousness. Its head twitched, powerful hind legs flexed against the crate walls, and its breathing pattern changed from the deep, regular rhythm of full sedation to the irregular gasps of an animal fighting its way back to awareness. The collar hadn't been fitted yet, creating a critical decision point for the research team. A senior veterinarian made the call to attempt repositioning the lion while it was still manageable, ordering the rear gate to be opened slowly with the metal barrier serving as protection. Victor stood off to the side of the trailer, holding a hydraulic jack intended for lifting the crate's rear axle, his attention focused on the left tire that had sunk slightly into the soft sand. They had no idea about the sequence that was about to unfold. African lions are the continent's second largest carnivores, with adult males capable of weighing over 400 pounds of pure muscle and bone-crushing strength. Their massive paws can shatter human bones with a single swipe, while their jaws deliver a bite force exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. Most critically, lions emerging from sedation are unpredictable and dangerous. The drugs used in field operations can wear off at different rates depending on the animal's metabolism, stress levels, and age, creating windows of partial consciousness where the animal retains its lethal capabilities while lacking normal behavioral inhibitions. What happened next occurred with the terrifying speed that characterizes all big cat attacks. The moment the gate cracked open, the lion exploded outward with shocking violence. This wasn't the sluggish emergence of a heavily sedated animal. This was 400 pounds of apex predator launching itself into action with deadly precision. The cat stumbled once on stiff legs, then regained its coordination in a blur of golden muscle and extended claws. The research team scattered in panic. 2 members dove behind the main vehicle, another threw himself back into the crate. But Victor hesitated, perhaps interpreting the initial stumble as a sign the lion was still heavily impaired. That moment of hesitation cost him his life. The lion covered the 20-foot distance in 3 powerful bounds, striking Victor mid-turn as he finally began to run. The impact knocked him flat onto the sand, the cat's massive weight driving him into the ground with bone-crushing force. Witnesses later described the attack as eerily silent. No roaring, no extended struggle, just the sickening sound of claws tearing through fabric and flesh as the lion established its grip. The predator's killing technique was textbook efficient. Lions typically kill large prey by clamping their powerful jaws around the throat, cutting off air supply while their weight and claws prevent escape. Victor suffered catastrophic injuries to his neck and shoulder as the lion's 4-inch canine teeth punctured vital structures, his cervical vertebrae dislocating under the tremendous pressure. 2 armed staff members fired warning shots into the air, but the lion, operating on pure predatory instinct, ignored the noise. Only a direct shot to the flank finally caused the cat to release its grip and stagger away from Victor's motionless form. By then, it was far too late. Victor's neck had been shredded, his jawbone exposed, and blood was rapidly soaking into the red Namibian earth beneath him. When Ministry of Environment officials arrived that afternoon following the staff's call an hour ago, the scene had been cordoned off and sanitized. The lion's carcass was removed for necropsy to determine sedation levels and whether any adverse reaction had contributed to the tragedy. Victor's body was placed in a black plastic bag and transported back to Windhoek, where forensics would officially list the cause of death as cervical dislocation and catastrophic blood loss from throat trauma. Victor Njenga's funeral was held 3 days later in Katatura Township, a small private affair attended only by family, a few co-workers, and neighbors who had known him since childhood. The manager sent a sealed letter and 2 months severance pay to the family, while a brief segment aired on local Oshawambo language radio. No English language press covered the incident. It was October 12, 2013 in Prince Albert National Park. A cold wind moved across Waskesiu Lake as tourists walked the boardwalk, leaves falling around them. In the brush just beyond the path, something watched in silence. Dan Armstrong was a 55-year-old recently retired postmaster from Winnipeg who had traded 3 decades behind the postal counter for the quiet pursuit of wildlife photography. He wasn't a rugged outdoorsman by any measure, but he harbored a genuine passion for capturing elk in their natural habitat, particularly during the misty morning hours when light and shadow created perfect photographic conditions. He and his wife Janine had booked a modest wilderness safari package through a regional travel company, complete with cabin accommodations, park passes, and loosely guided hiking schedules. It was meant to be their final autumn adventure before winter's harsh grip settled over the Canadian wilderness. Dan was carrying quality binoculars, a modest DSLR camera, and printed copies of the park's recommended trail maps. That morning, after breakfast in town, they had planned to walk the South Bay Boardwalk loop before lunch, hoping to photograph elk herds that typically move near the lake shore during colder months. Several locals had mentioned increased bear activity in recent weeks, but Dan assumed black bears would be preparing for hibernation, sluggish, reclusive, and unlikely to pose any real threat. But Dan didn't fully understand the desperate state of predators during poor foraging seasons. Black bears, while generally smaller and more timid than their grizzly cousins, can become extremely dangerous when unable to accumulate sufficient fat reserves before winter hibernation. Males who fail to reach adequate body weight may abandon their natural caution around humans, becoming aggressive scavengers willing to take extraordinary risks for food. These bears often exhibit erratic behavior, breaking into campsites, raiding garbage containers, and approaching humans with a boldness that contradicts their species' typical wariness. Earlier that week, rangers warned of a lone male black bear acting aggressively near the South Bay boardwalk, destroying trash bins and refusing to back off when challenged. Signs were posted and staff were told to alert hikers, but no rangers were on site that morning, and the warnings weren't mentioned in tour briefings. The trail passed through marshland and into dense forest, wooden rails marking its edge. The woods were quiet, footsteps muffled by damp leaves. Light filtered through the canopy in shifting patches, enough to hide something large. Janine trailed a few steps behind her husband, pointing out squirrel nests and old claw marks on the birch trees, signs that should have stopped them from continuing. About halfway through the loop, they heard rustling in the underbrush, the sharp crack of dry branches breaking in a thicket just beyond the guardrail. Dan slowed his pace and motioned for Janine to stop, leaning against the wooden barrier as he raised his camera. Assuming the movement indicated elk, he stepped closer to the rail and adjusted his zoom lens. Janine later recalled him whispering that there's something there as he focused his camera on the dense vegetation. Then, in an instant, a blur of black fur and muscle exploded from the undergrowth with terrifying speed. The bear charged directly at the guardrail, hitting it chest first with such force that the wooden barrier splintered and collapsed, sending Dan tumbling backward onto the forest floor. According to Janine, he landed hard on his shoulder, rolled once, and attempted to crawl away, but the bear was already upon him. Black bears usually weigh 200 to 400 pounds, but their stocky build gives them powerful striking force. This bear, desperate and hungry, showed no hesitation. It wasn't acting defensively. It bit into Dan's upper back and shoulder, then pinned him with both massive forepaws. Its claws, designed for climbing trees, easily capable of tearing through human flesh and bone. Janine screamed as the bear reared up and crashed down on her husband, ribs cracking on impact. It bit into the base of his neck, aiming for spine and arteries. Hikers shouted and threw rocks, one charged with a branch, but the bear didn't flinch. The attack was both brutal and efficient. After establishing its killing grip, the bear dragged Dan's body several feet into the underbrush before disappearing completely into the dense forest, hauling its victim by the midsection with the casual strength of an apex predator claiming its prize. Janine, pulled to safety by another hiker, was in severe shock while another called for help. Rangers arrived 25 minutes later. Despite extensive searches involving tracking dogs and aerial support, the bear was never located, having either retreated deeper into the wilderness or gone to ground in a den site to hibernate. Dan Armstrong's remains were recovered in fragments 4 days later by a ranger patrol near a suspected den site several miles from the attack location. Forensic teams confirmed the identity through dental records, and the family requested no autopsy be performed. A closed casket service was held in Winnipeg the following week, attended by relatives and a handful of retired postal workers who remembered Dan's quiet dedication and gentle nature. Park officials quietly reviewed trail safety procedures and reinforced several guardrails. The bear, presumed to be the same rogue male to have been exhibiting aggressive behavior, was never captured or killed. No additional attacks occurred in the area that season, and the boardwalk remains open to this day. It was May 30th, 2016. The Florida sun beating down mercilessly on the murky waters of Everglades National Park. The holiday crowds had begun to thin as temperatures soared, but the airboat tours continued their regular schedule, ferrying tourists through the ancient waterways where danger lurked just beneath the deceptively calm surface. Rico Mendez was a 26-year-old transmission specialist from Hialeah, Florida, known among his co-workers for his boisterous laugh and reflexive disregard for posted warnings. This spontaneous trip to the Everglades with two friends from the garage was nothing more than a casual day off, an opportunity for laughs and social media content. To Rico, the Everglades weren't a wild ecosystem demanding respect. They were simply background scenery for good selfies and bigger stories to tell later. The group boarded the airboat around 11:15 a.m., just as the sun began to hammer down with full force. Rico immediately made jokes about how gators were just slow swamp dogs, dismissing the very real danger that surrounded them. As their boat glided through shallow channels lined with cypress and sawgrass, the guide cut their engine near a slough, a slow-moving section of open water where alligators often congregate. American alligators have remained largely unchanged for over 200 million years. They can reach 13 feet in length, weigh up to 1,000 pounds, and deliver a bite force of 2,125 psi, enough to crush bone. As ambush predators, they launch from the water at over 20 miles per hour and use a violent death roll to tear prey apart. The guide gave his usual warning: don't feed the wildlife or lean over the rails. The animals weren't pets. They linked boats to food and could get aggressive. Rico, as always, ignored it. Despite the explicit instructions, Rico began tossing strips of beef jerky into the water while his friends laughed and recorded video. A dark shape appeared, hovering just feet from the boat's edge. A massive alligator, roughly 12 feet long, rose slowly from the depths, its prehistoric eyes fixed on the source of food. The guide shouted frantically for Rico to stop, but Rico was already squatting near the edge with his phone, grinning as he gestured for someone to take his picture. Then disaster struck with terrifying swiftness. Rico's foot slipped on the damp aluminum deck, still slick from spray. He pitched forward, arms first, then chest, into the murky water with a loud splash. The alligator reacted with the lightning-fast reflexes of a predator that had perfected its hunting technique over millions of years. The massive reptile lunged with jaws wide, clamping around Rico's torso with a brutal snap that fractured ribs instantly. Blood erupted into the water as Rico's friends desperately lunged for his legs, managing to grab his jeans briefly before the gator initiated its signature death roll. The violent spinning motion broke their grip immediately, and Rico disappeared beneath the surface in a churning vortex of blood and foam. Screams erupted across the airboat as the guide radioed for emergency response. More blood surfaced briefly, then the water returned to its deceptive calm, as if nothing had happened. Park rangers arrived within the hour, accompanied by officers from Florida Fish and Wildlife. Search divers equipped with protective gear and rifles combed the area with extreme caution. 3 hours later, they located Rico's remains near a submerged log. His body had been catastrophically damaged, missing the right arm and most of the left leg. Drag marks in the silt suggested the alligator had partially cached him for later consumption, a natural behavior that demonstrates these predators' methodical approach to feeding. The responsible alligator, a large male, was captured that evening and euthanized the following morning. Officials classified the incident as a food-conditioned fatality, a tragic but predictable result of human interference with natural predator behavior. Rico's funeral took place 5 days later at St. Monica Parish in Hialeah. The service was brief and sparsely attended. The airboat company faced no charges, but implemented new safety protocols and upgraded warning signage. A brief segment aired on local evening news under Holiday Tragedy, featuring stock alligator footage and images of the airboat dock. By the weekend, the story had been forgotten, replaced by other news. On July 17, 2022, the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania was experiencing perfect safari weather. Clear skies, moderate temperatures, and wildlife activity at its peak. For 54-year-old Klaus Bergman, a retired engineering professor from Munich, this trip represented the culmination of a lifelong dream. His partner Elise Weber, 51, had surprised him with the safari for his birthday after years of watching wildlife documentaries together in their modest apartment overlooking the Isar River. Klaus had always been methodical and deeply curious, the kind of man who filled shelves with neatly labeled binders of technical journals long after retirement. Reserved but quietly passionate, he developed a love for African wildlife during his university years when he attended a guest lecture on predatory ecology. Ever since, lions and elephants had fascinated him, not just for their strength, but for the precision and intelligence behind their behavior. Elise, on the other hand, was the more intuitive and emotionally attuned of the two. She had worked as a school librarian for nearly 2 decades and had a quiet charm that made children instinctively trust her. While Klaus absorbed technical manuals, Elise favored poetry and memoirs. She was content to let Klaus lead when it came to planning trips or researching camera gear, preferring instead to savor the moment and document their journeys in handwritten travel diaries. They lived in Heidhausen, a historic neighborhood in Munich, in a third-floor flat filled with houseplants, old travel books, and framed photographs from previous adventures across Europe and Asia. The Serengeti trip was meant to be their first and perhaps only adventure into the wild heart of Africa. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a shared milestone, a tribute to everything they had built together over 19 years. What they didn't realize, what no one ever does, is that this would be the last trip they ever take together. Just one more walk, one more morning without knowing it was the end. Klaus had meticulously prepared for this journey, purchasing a Canon EOS R5 specifically for wildlife photography, attending 3 photography workshops, and reading every Serengeti guidebook available. His backpack contained extra memory cards, lens filters, and a notebook where he'd been documenting every species they encountered. The couple had saved for 3 years to afford this premium walking safari experience, choosing Authentic Africa expeditions for their stellar safety record and small group sizes. Their guide, Joseph Makundi, had led walking safaris for 15 years without incident. That morning, he had conducted the standard safety briefing at the luxury tented camp where the group of 6 tourists had spent the night. He emphasized the importance of staying together, warned against wandering off, and made it clear that in the event of predator encounters, guests were to remain still and follow his instructions without hesitation. He looked each person in the eye as he spoke, silently confirming their understanding. The walking safari had begun at 6:30 a.m., with Joseph leading the way through golden grasslands dotted with acacia trees. By mid-morning, the group had already spotted zebras, giraffes, and a distant herd of elephants. Klaus was ecstatic, his excitement barely containable as he whispered his amazement to Elise. This moment was surpassing everything he had ever imagined. Around 11:15 a.m., the group paused near a small watering hole where a family of warthogs was drinking cautiously. While Joseph was explaining the ecosystem to the other tourists, Klaus noticed a beautiful yellow-billed hornbill perched on a branch about 164 feet away, and in a hushed tone, drew Elise's attention to it. He was eager to capture it, the kind of shot he had envisioned for years. Without alerting Joseph, Klaus and Elise quietly stepped away from the group, moving toward the hornbill with careful, measured steps. Klaus was so focused on framing the perfect photograph that he failed to notice how far they had strayed from the main group. After capturing several shots of the bird, Klaus suggested they return to the group by following what looked like a game trail curving around a cluster of bushes. He was confident that they could rejoin from the other side and reassured Elise, who was beginning to show signs of worry. What Klaus couldn't know was that they had wandered into one of the most dangerous situations possible on an African safari. Hidden in the tall grass beyond the bushes, a lioness was watching her 3 cubs play. The path Klaus and Elise had chosen would place them directly between the mother and her young, a position that would trigger the most primal protective instincts in any predator. At 11:27 a.m., as they rounded the bushes, Elise was the first to notice movement in the grass. 3 lion cubs playing near the bushes. Alarm crept into her voice as she urgently warned Klaus, clutching his arm. She wanted to turn back immediately. Klaus instinctively raised his camera, his photographer's instinct briefly overriding the sense of danger. He muttered something about taking one last shot, already adjusting his lens. The attack came without warning. The lioness, having spotted the humans approaching her vulnerable cubs, launched herself from the hidden position in the grass. She covered the 98 feet between them in mere seconds, a blur of muscle and deadly intent. Klaus barely had time to lower his camera before 180 kilograms of apex predator slammed into him with devastating force. The impact knocked Klaus backwards, his camera flying from his hands as he crashed to the ground. The lioness's powerful jaws clamped down on his neck, a killing technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. Her canines, designed to sever the spinal cords of zebras and wildebeests, easily penetrated Klaus's flesh. Elise's screams echoed across the savannah as she watched in horror. The lioness shook Klaus violently, the way these predators typically kill their prey. His body went limp almost immediately as the bite crushed his trachea and severed his carotid artery. Blood soaked into the parched earth beneath him. The lioness released Klaus momentarily, her instincts telling her to check on her cubs. In that brief pause, she noticed Elise, who had fallen to her knees in shock. Then the predator turned toward the second potential threat, her blood-stained muzzle low to the ground, muscles tensed for another attack. Elise, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the lioness approached her with deliberate steps. The predator was just 9 feet away when a sharp crack split the air, a warning shot from Joseph's rifle. The lioness hesitated, torn between protecting her cubs and facing this new threat. Joseph had heard the growl in the distance and sprinted toward the scene, rifle in hand. As he closed the distance, he fired again, louder and closer this time. The lioness, caught between maternal instinct and the advancing danger, snarled but began to back away. Muscles still coiled, she lingered for a tense pause, then turned toward her cubs and slipped into the tall grass, disappearing almost as quickly as she had appeared. The aftermath unfolded with grim efficiency. Joseph radioed for emergency assistance while attempting to comfort a hysterical Elise, who had sustained deep lacerations to her legs from falling onto thorny brush during the attack. Klaus lay motionless on the blood-soaked ground, his eyes open but unseeing. The medical team that arrived 30 minutes later could only confirm what Joseph already knew. Klaus Bergman had died almost immediately from catastrophic trauma to his neck and spine. The incident sent shockwaves through Tanzania's tourism industry. An official investigation was launched by the Tanzanian Wildlife Authority, focusing on whether safety protocols had been followed. While the guide was found to have delivered the standard briefing, the decision to allow the group to split, however briefly, was flagged as a critical failure. Authentic Africa Expeditions responded by overhauling its procedures. Guests were now required to wear GPS trackers during all walking safaris, and an additional ranger was assigned to shadow every group from a distance. The tragedy also prompted new national guidelines discouraging off-path detours, even for photography. Elise survived, but survival came with clarity. How fast the wild turns, how little room there is for error. On August 23, 2018, the Okavango Delta in Botswana shimmered under the relentless African sun, temperatures soaring to 104 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. For 38-year-old Luc Moreau, a marketing executive from Lyon, France, this luxury safari represented not just a vacation, but an escape, a hard-earned pause from a relentless, fast-paced life. For nearly 2 decades, Luc had thrived in a high-pressure corporate environment known for his quick thinking, sharp instincts, and tireless work ethic. Colleagues admired him, clients trusted him, and his firm saw him as indispensable. But behind his clean-cut appearance and confident presentations was a man running dangerously low on fuel. He lived alone in a modest, minimalist apartment in Lyon's Confluence district, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Sion River. Every morning he followed the same routine: 5:30 a.m. gym sessions, black coffee, tailored suit, and a barrage of emails before the office even opened. He rarely took vacations, preferring to rack up unused leave while climbing the corporate ladder. Friends had often teased him about his workaholic streak, but Luke had always insisted he was fine, that he'd rest once things settled down. That break never came. After finalizing a major merger that had consumed 18 months of his life, Luke finally hit a wall. He began experiencing migraines, minor panic attacks, and long stretches of mental fog. His doctor had urged him to take time off. A colleague recently back from southern Africa had casually mentioned the Okavango Delta as a peaceful paradise. That same night, Luke had gone online and booked a 2-week stay at Mokolodi Delta Camp, a high-end lodge known for privacy, gourmet cuisine, and raw, unfiltered wilderness. He arrived 3 days before the incident, immediately charmed by the camp's elegant thatched roof cabins overlooking a small lake that branched off from the main delta channels. His accommodation featured an outdoor shower, a private deck, and uninterrupted views of wildlife coming to drink at the water's edge. Luke was struck by how quiet it was. No phones ringing, no buzzing notifications, no artificial urgency. He found himself sleeping longer, breathing deeper, and walking slower, finally feeling like a version of himself he hadn't known in years. During check-in, the lodge manager, Precious Indlovu, had conducted a thorough safety briefing. She had stressed that guests should never walk unescorted after dark and that swimming in the lake was strictly prohibited due to crocodiles and hippos. Luke had nodded along, though his focus had already drifted to the elephants visible just beyond the deck. He didn't mean to be careless, he just desperately wanted to disconnect. That morning, Luke had joined 5 other guests for a 6-hour game drive led by Cabo, an experienced guide with encyclopedic knowledge of the Delta's ecosystem. The Land Cruiser had departed at 5:30 a.m., allowing them to witness a spectacular sunrise over the floodplains. By 10 a.m., they had already spotted lions lounging after a kill, a leopard draped elegantly over an acacia branch, and countless antelope species grazing on the lush vegetation. Cabo had positioned the vehicle perfectly for photographs, explaining the behavior of each animal with passionate detail. As the day heated up, Luke found himself increasingly uncomfortable. Despite the canvas roof of the safari vehicle, the sun beat down mercilessly, and his light linen shirt clung to his back with sweat. He drained his water bottle quickly, accepting a refill from Cabo's cooler. By the time they returned to the lodge at 11:30 a.m., Luke was thoroughly overheated. While the other guest headed to the dining area for lunch, he retreated to his cabin. The shower provided temporary relief, but stepping back into the humid air left him feeling sticky and uncomfortable almost immediately. From his deck, Luke gazed longingly at the lake just 164 feet from his cabin. The water looked cool and inviting, its surface glassy and still in the midday heat. He could see no signs of the dangerous animals mentioned in the safety briefing, no hippo ears protruding from the surface, no crocodiles sunning themselves on the banks. Just clear, tempting water that promised blessed relief from the oppressive heat. Luke checked his watch, 1:15 p.m. The afternoon game drive wouldn't depart until 4 p.m., leaving nearly 3 hours to kill. What he craved was solitude and coolness. He told himself it would just be a quick dip. 5 minutes in and out, no one would even notice. Decision made, Luke changed into swimming trunks and grabbed a towel. He scanned the area around his cabin. No staff members were visible in the midday heat, most likely taking their own breaks between the morning and afternoon activities. As Luke approached the water's edge, he noticed a faded sign partially obscured by vegetation. Danger, no swimming crocodiles. He hesitated briefly, then rationalized his decision. The water was clear enough that he could see the sandy bottom near the shore. Surely any large predator would be visible. Besides, he would stay inside the shallows just deep enough to submerge his overheated body briefly before returning to his cabin. At 1:22 p.m., Luke stepped into the lake, sighing with pleasure as the cool water enveloped his ankles, then his calves. The bottom was firm sand, sloping gradually deeper. He waded out until the water reached his waist, then bent his knees to submerge his shoulders. The relief was immediate and exquisite. He closed his eyes, savoring the sensation of heat leaving his body, completely unaware that his movements had already been detected. The Nile crocodile that had claimed this section of the lake as its territory was a massive specimen, nearly 16 feet long and weighing approximately 1,100 pounds. It had been resting in a reed-covered inlet about 90 feet from where Luke entered the water. Though nearly invisible with only its nostrils and eyes breaking the surface, the ancient predator had immediately sensed the vibration of Luke's entrance into its domain. Crocodiles are patient hunters, having perfected their ambush technique over 200 million years of evolution. This particular specimen began moving toward Luke with barely a ripple, its powerful tail propelling it silently through the water while its body remained completely submerged. Its cold, prehistoric brain registered only one thing: prey had entered its territory. Luke, feeling wonderfully refreshed, decided to wade a few feet deeper to fully immerse himself. The water now reached his chest as he moved parallel to the shore, unaware that death was approaching from behind at frightening speed. His first indication that something was wrong came when he noticed small fish darting away in all directions, a split-second warning that came far too late. The attack was devastatingly swift and precise. The crocodile surged forward in a final explosive burst, its massive jaws clamping around Luke's right thigh with bone-crushing force. Over 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch, more than enough to shatter his femur instantly, closed on his flesh. Luke's scream of shock and agony echoed across the water, cut short as the crocodile executed its instinctive death roll. The predator spun violently, twisting Luke underwater in a disorienting spiral designed to tear chunks from its prey and drown it simultaneously. Water filled his lungs as he was dragged beneath the surface, his body contorting unnaturally with the force of the rotation. His fingers clawed desperately at the crocodile's armored snout, finding no purchase on the prehistoric scales. For a brief moment, the crocodile paused its rolling and Luke broke the surface, gasping and choking. He managed to scream for help before being dragged under again. On the shore, a groundskeeper who had been trimming vegetation heard the cry and looked up in horror to see the water churning violently about 200 feet from the bank. The crocodile rolled again, more powerfully this time. Underwater, Luke felt his consciousness fading as oxygen deprivation and shock took their toll. The pain in his shattered leg had become strangely distant, his body shutting down non-essential functions as it entered survival mode. In his final moments of awareness, he registered being dragged deeper into the lake, away from the shore, away from any possibility of rescue. The groundskeeper ran toward the main lodge, shouting for help. Staff quickly responded, launching a small aluminum boat used for emergency purposes. By the time Cabo and two others reached the lake center, there was nothing to see but expanding ripples and floating reeds. Luke Moreau had vanished completely, dragged to the crocodile's underwater cache, a submerged hollow in the riverbank where large prey is stored until it begins to decompose, making it easier for the reptile to tear apart. A search was immediately launched, with staff members scanning the shoreline and security personnel notifying local authorities. Lodge guests were confined to their cabins as the grim reality of what had happened became clear. Precious, the lodge manager, contacted the French embassy in Gaborone to report the incident, her voice shaking as she explained the circumstances. Luke's body was discovered nearly 24 hours later, partially submerged in a reed bed approximately 650 feet from where he had entered the water. In warmer, oxygen-rich shallows like this part of the delta, decomposition can sometimes release gases quickly enough to float a body within a day. The crocodile had consumed significant portions of his torso and right leg, leaving behind a grisly reminder of nature's brutal efficiency. A team from the Botswana Wildlife Authority captured and euthanized the crocodile responsible, a notorious specimen that local fishermen had nicknamed Old Ghost for its ability to appear and disappear without warning. Mokolodi Delta Camp temporarily closed for a comprehensive safety review, installing additional fencing around water access points and implementing hourly security patrols. Warning signs were made larger and more prominent with multilingual instructions about the lethal danger posed by the Delta's predators. On November 12, 2021, dark clouds gathered over Tanzania's Ngorongoro Conservation Area as the short rainy season rolled in. For Anatoly and Elena Petrov, newlyweds from St. Petersburg, the growing storm didn't feel like a warning. It added an edge of wilderness to what was meant to be the most unforgettable journey of their lives. Just 10 days earlier, they had stood in a quiet chapel outside the city, exchanging vows after a 5-year relationship that had carried them through school, hardship, and success. Anatoly, 31, had built a modest tech empire in the wake of the 2017 Bitcoin boom. His charm was quick and unfiltered, and his energy often left people in his orbit breathless. Elena, 29, was precise and calm, a pediatric surgeon who had postponed this honeymoon 3 times to honor her surgical roster. The safari was Anatoly's dream, an escape into nature's raw beauty before settling back into careers and the quiet rhythms of married life. They'd chosen the most exclusive experience available, the Diamond Safari package from Tanzanian Luxury Expeditions. Everything had been arranged to perfection: private lodge, private guide, private vehicle, and a custom itinerary far from the usual tourist routes. The night before, they'd spent hours on the lodge veranda, stargazing over glasses of chilled Chardonnay and tracing their next day's path across a printed map. Anatoly had circled a remote valley known for black rhinos and Cape buffalo. Emmanuel Mkapa, their veteran guide of 15 years, had reviewed the route with them the following morning over breakfast. He'd noticed the sky turning gray at dawn and had hesitated when they discussed the western trails: steeper, narrower, and more sensitive to rain. But Anatoly had pressed, eager to photograph animals others rarely saw, and Elena had agreed, moved by his enthusiasm and reassured by Emmanuel's confidence behind the wheel. By mid-morning, they'd driven deep into the reserve. The vehicle, a reinforced Land Rover Defender with custom suspension and all-terrain tires, handled the uneven terrain with ease. The first hours were everything they had hoped for. They saw a serval cat stalking silently through the tall grass and caught a rare glimpse of a pangolin emerging from under a tree trunk. A black rhino stood silhouetted on a ridge as if posing for them. Elena leaned into Anatoly's shoulder, her expression lit with awe. Anatoly's camera clicked furiously as he narrated every moment into his own memory. As the clock neared 11:30 a.m., a shift came suddenly. The clouds thickened into a dark ceiling overhead, the wind picked up. A few heavy drops landed on the Defender's windshield, then turned into sheets of rain as a thunderclap rolled across the crater basin. Emmanuel, watching the change with growing unease, tapped his phone screen repeatedly, scanning radar maps. The storm was moving in faster than forecast had predicted. He advised a return. Routes would soon become unstable. Anatoly had asked if there might be time for one last stop. The Buffalo Valley he had marked on the map was just ahead and technically closer than the drive back. Emmanuel relented but warned that if conditions worsened, they'd have to turn around immediately. 15 minutes later, the road beneath them began to transform. The dusty trail turned slick, a thick sludge of red mud. The Defender's tires lost traction on mild slopes and visibility shrank beneath the curtain of falling rain. As they crept forward, the path narrowed, flanked on one side by rising terrain and on the other by a steep drop into a ravine choked with scrub and broken rock. Emmanuel scanned for a safe spot to turn back. He found a slight opening in the brush, a tight curve with barely enough room to maneuver the vehicle, and began to guide the Defender through a slow pivot. The slope beneath them, softened by rain, had already started to give way. As the front tires began to straighten, the ground under the right side collapsed. The Defender tipped suddenly, the world outside tilting with it. Emmanuel fought the steering wheel instinctively, attempting to pull the vehicle back to level ground, but the Land Rover's weight shifted and momentum took hold. With a groan of metal and a hiss of wet mud, the vehicle slid sideways off the trail and began a rapid descent down the slope. Inside the cabin, Elena gripped Anatoly's hand with white-knuckled panic. He reached across her, instinctively bracing her body, but they were already beyond control. The first impact jolted the vehicle sideways into a hidden boulder, launching it into a barrel roll. The roof crumpled as they flipped. Seatbelts strained, shards of glass burst inward. On the second rotation, Anatoly's head struck the doorframe with catastrophic force. The angle of the impact snapped his neck instantly. When the Defender finally landed at the bottom of the ravine, it came to rest upside down, partially submerged in the water, rushing through the thickening storm runoff. Rain thudded against the battered undercarriage as steam hissed from the cracked engine. Elena opened her eyes to a distorted world of blood, metal, and rain. Her forehead throbbed, warmth spilling down into her right eye. Her left arm was limp, broken, and pinned under the center console. She turned and found Anatoly slumped to the side, his neck twisted unnaturally, his expression blank. She stared for a moment, disbelieving. Then something deep in her chest fractured as the truth settled in. The rising water began to lap against her waist. She freed herself with her uninjured arm, gasping as each movement sent bolts of pain through her body. With desperate effort, she dragged herself across the inverted cabin, kicking glass away from a shattered window. Her right leg caught the edge of the frame, slicing it open, but she didn't stop. She pulled herself out into the ravine, collapsing beside the wreckage in the mud, sobbing from pain and loss. Minutes passed, maybe more. She finally gathered enough strength to crawl to a fallen tree trunk and leaned against it, shaking uncontrollably. The stream that had been a trickle was now swelling, turning the base of the ravine into a shallow flood. Then she noticed movement across the water. Dark, slow-moving shapes emerged from the mist, at first unrecognizable through the rain and her half-blurred vision. But soon they took form. A herd of Cape buffalo, their shoulders heavy and slick with rain, pushed forward from the bush, moving toward the stream. Elena remained frozen against the tree, remembering Emmanuel's warnings. Buffalo were unpredictable, territorial, and highly reactive to perceived threats. The lead bull, massive and scarred from past battles, stopped at the edge of the water. He sniffed the air, lifting his nose. His gaze swept the ravine, landing directly on her. Elena tried to quiet her breathing, bury the moan rising from her ribs. But her body betrayed her. A gasp of pain escaped, too loud, too human. The bull's head snapped toward her, eyes locking onto the source of the sound. With terrifying precision, he stepped forward, then broke into a charge. The ground shook as he crossed the shallow water. Elena didn't move. She couldn't. The bull struck her midsection with full force, his horns lifting her off the ground and tossing her into the mud. Before she could process what had happened, he was on her again, horns stabbing into her torso, hooves trampling her chest and shoulders, breaking bones with every impact. She faded quickly, her consciousness slipping away as the herd passed over her, indifferent and unrelenting. The search team found the wreckage the following morning. The Land Rover was buried halfway in the mud, its tires jutting skyward. Emmanuel's body remained strapped in the driver's seat, crushed against the steering wheel. Anatoly had been thrown partially through a broken window during the descent. Elena's remains were discovered farther downstream, her body bearing unmistakable trauma from horn strikes and trampling. The incident triggered a formal investigation by the Ngorongoro Conservation Authority. It confirmed what Emmanuel's logs already showed. He had expressed concern about the forecast, but had proceeded with the couple's request to explore deeper trails. While technically within policy at the time, his decision to continue after the rain began was deemed a critical lapse in judgment. The route they took had a known history of slope erosion during wet conditions. Tanzanian luxury expeditions responded by overhauling its weather protocols, banning off-trail excursions during the rainy season, and requiring real-time terrain monitoring for all private safaris. Emergency response standards were tightened, and access to Western Rim trails was partially restricted until further notice. Back in St. Petersburg, the Petrovs' funeral drew hundreds. Photos from the days before the accident of a smiling couple beneath acacia trees, of a camera focused on a black rhino, stood behind two closed caskets. Their story echoed across continents as a reminder that even in paradise, danger can hide in a single decision. One route, one wrong call, and the wild does not give second chances.
It was July 15, 2016, and the vast plains of Serengeti National Park stretched endlessly under the African stars, their ancient rhythms undisturbed by the modern world beyond its borders. The Patterson family's campsite sat in a remote section of the park, far from the luxury lodges and established tourist routes. Michael and Sarah Patterson had chosen this budget safari operator specifically for its promise of authentic wilderness experiences, believing their daughters Emma and Sophie would benefit from sleeping under the real African sky rather than behind the walls of expensive accommodations. Michael Patterson had been planning this trip for 2 years, working overtime at his accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio, while Sarah picked up extra nursing shifts at the local hospital. At 32, Michael was determined to give his family an adventure that would create lasting memories, even if it meant cutting corners on luxury to afford the experience. Sarah, 29, had initially been hesitant about bringing their young daughters on such an adventurous trip, but Michael's enthusiasm had eventually won her over. The family had been in Tanzania for 4 days, and the girls were already enchanted by the wildlife they had seen during their game drives. 6-year-old Emma had filled a notebook with drawings of zebras and giraffes, while 4-year-old Sophie collected interesting rocks and leaves that their guide had said were safe to touch. The budget tour operator had provided basic camping equipment and a guide who managed multiple groups simultaneously, often leaving families unsupervised for hours at a time. That evening, the family had set up their tent in an area that their guide had assured them was safe, though he had mentioned almost casually that lions sometimes passed through the region during their nightly hunts. The campsite lacked the electric fencing and elevated platforms that more expensive operators used, relying instead on a basic perimeter of rope and small solar lights that were supposed to deter wildlife. African lions are apex predators that hunt primarily at night, using coordinated pack strategies to take down prey much larger than themselves. Adult males can weigh up to 420 pounds, while females are typically smaller but more agile hunters. Lions have excellent night vision and acute hearing, making them perfectly adapted for nocturnal hunting. Prides often work together during attacks, with different members taking specific roles to ensure successful kills. Around 10 p.m., Michael noticed that their tent's main zipper had broken, leaving a gap of several inches that couldn't be properly closed. Sarah suggested they ask their guide for help, but Michael was reluctant to wake the man who had been managing 3 different campsites and seemed exhausted. Instead, Michael decided to attempt a temporary repair using the small sewing kit that Sarah had packed for emergencies. Michael worked by flashlight while Sarah and the girls tried to sleep, but the repair proved more difficult than expected. The tent's fabric was thick and the broken zipper teeth were jammed, requiring him to cut away damaged sections and attempt to create a makeshift closure using safety pins and cord. A pride of 5 lions had been hunting in the area and had detected the unusual activity at the human camp. The broken tent, the moving light, and the unfamiliar sounds had drawn their curiosity, and they began approaching the campsite with the stealth that made them such effective predators. Around 3 a.m., Michael was still working on the tent repair when he heard a low growling sound just outside the fabric walls. He froze, his flashlight beam wavering as he tried to determine the source of the noise. The growling grew louder and was joined by additional sounds that suggested multiple animals were surrounding their tent. The first lion pushed through the gap in the broken zipper, its massive head and shoulders forcing the opening wider as it entered the confined space of the tent. Michael grabbed the flashlight and tried to use it to drive the animal back, but the lion's predatory instincts had been fully triggered by the scent and sounds of the trapped humans. Sarah screamed as the lion's jaws clamped down on Michael's arm, the powerful bite crushing bone and tearing through muscle tissue. The sound woke Emma and Sophie, who began crying as they witnessed their father being attacked by the massive predator. Sarah tried to shield her daughters while calling for help, but their remote location meant no assistance was available. A second lion entered the tent through the widened opening, followed quickly by a third. The confined space became a death trap as the pride's coordinated hunting instincts took over. Michael's attempts to fight back were futile against the lion's superior strength and natural weapons, his injuries from the first attack leaving him unable to effectively protect his family. The lion's attack was swift and methodical, their natural hunting behaviors adapted perfectly for taking down multiple prey in a confined space. Emma and Sophie's cries were cut short as the pride's attack continued, the lion's powerful jaws and claws inflicting fatal injuries on all 4 family members within minutes. The guide discovered the scene at dawn when he arrived to check on the family's campsite. The lions had departed hours earlier, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emergency services were called, but all 4 family members had died from massive trauma inflicted during the coordinated attack. The investigation revealed multiple safety violations by the tour operator, including inadequate campsite security, insufficient guide supervision, and failure to provide proper safety equipment. The company's permits were revoked, and new regulations were implemented requiring electric fencing and armed guards at all camping sites in predator areas. The Patterson family's deaths sent shockwaves through the safari tourism industry and prompted their extended family to advocate for stricter safety standards for budget tour operators. The tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of cutting corners on safety measures in one of the world's most dangerous environments. But families weren't the only people who underestimated the deadly power of African predators. In South Africa, a photographer's determination to capture the perfect shot would bring her into fatal contact with one of nature's most elusive killers. It was April 3rd, 2014, and the dense bushveld of Kruger National Park provided perfect cover for the predators that ruled this ancient ecosystem. Elena Rodriguez had been tracking a female leopard for 3 days, following the elusive cat through terrain that few tourists ever experienced. The Spanish photographer had finally located her quarry, resting in a massive marula tree with her 2 young cubs, presenting the exact opportunity she had been hired to capture. Elena Rodriguez had built her reputation photographing wildlife in the mountains of Spain, but African assignments represented a significant step up in both prestige and danger. At 27, she was determined to establish herself as a serious wildlife photographer, taking on increasingly challenging assignments that other photographers avoided. The Nature magazine that had commissioned her leopard photos was paying well, but they expected images that would stand out from the thousands of generic safari shots flooding the market. Elena had been working alone for most of her 3-week assignment, believing that solo work allowed her to get closer to animals without the noise and distraction of guides or other photographers. Her experience with European wildlife had given her confidence, but nothing had prepared her for the territorial aggression and protective instincts of African predators defending their young. That afternoon, Elena had positioned herself about 50 meters from the tree where the leopard family was resting, using a telephoto lens to capture images of the cubs playing while their mother watched vigilantly. The shots were good, but Elena knew they lacked the dramatic impact that would make them magazine-worthy. Leopards are solitary, territorial predators known for their incredible climbing ability and fierce protection of their young. Adult females typically weigh between 60 and 130 pounds, but possess strength far exceeding their size, capable of dragging prey twice their weight up into trees. Mother leopards with cubs are particularly dangerous, as they will attack any perceived threat to their offspring with devastating ferocity. Elena noticed a large sausage tree about 30 meters from the leopard's resting spot that would provide an elevated angle for more dramatic shots. The tree's thick branches and sturdy trunk made it appear safe to climb, and Elena reasoned that the height advantage would allow her to capture unique images while maintaining a respectful distance from the leopard family. What Elena failed to realize was that her chosen tree was positioned directly above the leopard's primary escape route, the path the mother would use to move her cubs to safety if threatened. By climbing the tree, Elena had unknowingly blocked the leopard's exit strategy and positioned herself as a direct threat to the family's security. As Elena reached a height of about 15 feet and began setting up her camera equipment, the mother leopard's behavior changed dramatically. The cat's ears flattened against her head, and she began making low, growling sounds while positioning herself between her cubs and Elena's location. The leopard's attack came without further warning, the powerful cat launching herself from her resting branch with explosive force. The mother leopard covered the distance to Elena's tree in seconds, her claws finding purchase on the bark as she climbed toward the perceived threat. The leopard struck Elena with devastating force, her powerful claws raking across the photographer's back and shoulders, while her jaws clamped down on Elena's neck and head. The impact of the attack caused Elena to lose her grip on the tree, and both she and the leopard fell toward the ground in a tangle of claws, teeth, and camera equipment. Elena hit the ground hard, her camera gear scattering across the rocky soil as the leopard continued her attack. The cat's maternal instincts drove her to eliminate the threat completely, her powerful jaws inflicting massive trauma to Elena's head and neck, while her claws opened deep wounds across her torso and limbs. Elena's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed her system, her body unable to withstand the leopard's relentless assault. The remote location meant that no help was available, and Elena died from her injuries within minutes of the initial attack. Elena's body was discovered 2 days later by park rangers who had been alerted when she failed to check in at her scheduled time. Her camera equipment was found scattered around the attack site, with her final images showing the leopard's increasing agitation before the fatal encounter. The investigation revealed that Elena had violated park regulations populations by working alone in dangerous areas and approaching too close to wildlife with young. Her death prompted stricter enforcement of safety protocols for photographers working in national parks and highlighted the extreme dangers posed by protective mother leopards. Elena's tragic death served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife photographers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African predators, particularly when maternal instincts were involved. Her story became a cautionary tale shared among wildlife photographers about the importance of understanding animal behavior and maintaining safe distances. Yet photographers weren't the only professionals who found themselves in deadly encounters with African wildlife. In Botswana, a conservationist's dedication to his research would lead him into a fatal confrontation with one of Africa's most deceptively dangerous animals. It was September 28, 2017, and the crystal-clear channels of the Okavango Delta reflected the African sky like mirrors, their pristine waters hiding some of the continent's most dangerous predators beneath their deceptively peaceful surface. Dr. James Mitchell had been living at his remote research station for 6 months, studying hippo behavior patterns in one of the world's most pristine wetland ecosystems. The isolation and intimate access to wildlife represented the opportunity of a lifetime for the marine biologist turned conservationist. Dr. James Mitchell had dedicated his career to understanding aquatic ecosystems, earning his PhD in marine biology before transitioning to African wildlife conservation. At 35, he was considered one of the leading experts on hippo behavior, but his passion for his work had led him to take increasingly risky approaches to data collection. His research station was located in one of the most remote sections of the Delta, accessible only by boat and staffed by just James and a single research assistant. James had been documenting the daily movement patterns of a local hippopod, tracking their feeding routes and territorial behaviors to better understand their impact on the Delta's ecosystem. His work required him to collect water samples and observe the animals at close range, often working alone when his assistant was occupied with other research tasks. That morning, James had planned to collect water samples from a narrow channel that the hippos used as a highway between their daytime resting areas and nighttime feeding grounds. He had observed their patterns for months and believed he understood their schedule well enough to work safely in the area during what he considered low-risk periods. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh over 4,000 pounds and are capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour both on land and in water. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees and deliver bite forces exceeding 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of crushing a human body or biting a canoe in half. Hippos are highly territorial and become extremely aggressive during mating season or when protecting their young. James waded into the channel carrying his water sampling equipment, confident that the hippos were all resting on land during the heat of the day. The water was chest deep in the center of the channel, but James had worked in similar conditions dozens of times without incident. What he didn't know was that a large territorial bull had recently moved into the area and was resting submerged in the deeper water just upstream from his sampling location. The massive hippo had been aware of James's presence from the moment he entered the water, but had remained motionless in the murky depths while assessing the threat. Hippos can hold their breath for up to 5 minutes and often rest completely submerged during the day, making them nearly invisible to humans working in the water above them. As James moved deeper into the channel to reach the optimal sampling location, he unknowingly entered the hippo's territorial zone. The 3,500-pound bull erupted from the water without warning, his massive bulk creating a wave that knocked James off balance before the animal's jaws could reach him. James tried to retreat toward the shore, but the hippo's speed in water made escape impossible. The massive animal's jaws clamped down on James's torso with bone-crushing force, the impact driving him underwater as the hippo's territorial aggression took over completely. The hippo's attack was prolonged and brutal, the massive animal using his enormous size and strength to ensure that the perceived threat was completely eliminated. James's research equipment scattered across the channel as the hippo continued his assault, his powerful jaws and massive weight inflicting fatal injuries that no human could survive. James's research assistant discovered his body hours later when he failed to return to the research station at the scheduled time. The investigation revealed that James had been working alone in known hippo territory during mating season, when the animal's territorial aggression was at its peak. James's death prompted a complete review of safety protocols for wildlife researchers working in aquatic environments and highlighted the extreme danger posed by hippos to humans working in their territory. His research station was relocated to a safer area, and new regulations required researchers to work in pairs when collecting samples in hippo habitat. The tragedy served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife researchers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African animals. It was December 11th, 2015, and the Zambezi River flowed past Victoria Falls with deceptive tranquility, its muddy waters hiding some of Africa's most dangerous predators beneath their placid surface. Kevin O'Brien had been staying at a backpacker lodge near the falls for 3 days, drinking heavily with other travelers and seeking increasingly dangerous thrills to impress his new friends. The 24-year-old Irish graduate had been traveling through Africa for 2 months, documenting his adventures on social media and constantly pushing the boundaries of acceptable risk. Kevin O'Brien had arrived in Africa fresh from university with a degree in business and a trust fund that allowed him to travel indefinitely without working. His social media accounts were filled with photos of bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, and other extreme activities, each post designed to showcase his fearlessness and adventurous spirit. Kevin's need for validation through dangerous stunts had escalated throughout his trip, with each new activity requiring greater risk to generate the same level of excitement. The backpacker lodge where Kevin was staying catered to young adventure tourists, offering cheap accommodation and easy access to extreme sports activities. The lodge's bar was a gathering place for travelers sharing stories of their exploits and daring each other to attempt increasingly dangerous feats. Kevin had quickly established himself as the most reckless member of the group, often accepting dares that other travelers considered too dangerous. That evening, Kevin had been drinking heavily with a group of fellow backpackers when the conversation turned to swimming in the Zambezi River. Local staff and experienced travelers had warned against entering the water due to the presence of Nile crocodiles, but Kevin dismissed these warnings as exaggerated attempts to control tourist behavior. Nile crocodiles are among the world's most dangerous reptiles, with adult males reaching lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 1,500 pounds. These apex predators are perfectly adapted for ambush hunting, capable of remaining motionless for hours while waiting for prey to approach. Their explosive attack speed and bone-crushing bite force make them responsible for hundreds of human deaths annually across Africa. Nile crocodiles are particularly dangerous in areas near tourist activities, as they often associate human presence with easy feeding opportunities. Around dawn, Kevin accepted a dare from other backpackers to swim across a section of the Zambezi known for its crocodile population. Despite warnings from lodge staff and the obvious danger of the murky water, Kevin's alcohol-impaired judgment and need to maintain his reputation for fearlessness overrode his survival instincts. Kevin entered the water at a popular fishing spot where local guides had reported recent crocodile sightings. The river appeared calm and peaceful in the early morning light, but the murky water made it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. Kevin began swimming toward the opposite bank, his strokes creating ripples and splashing sounds that carried far through the quiet morning air. A massive Nile crocodile, over 16 feet in length, had been hunting in the area and detected Kevin's movement in the water from several hundred meters away. The ancient predator began approaching with the patience and stealth that had made crocodiles successful hunters for millions of years, remaining completely submerged as it closed the distance to its prey. Kevin was halfway across the river when the crocodile struck, the massive reptile launching itself from the depths with explosive force. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on Kevin's leg with bone-crushing pressure, the impact driving him underwater as the predator began its signature death roll. The crocodile spun rapidly in the water, using its massive weight and powerful tail to disorient Kevin while maintaining its deadly grip. Each rotation caused additional trauma as the reptile's teeth tore through muscle and bone, while the spinning motion made it impossible for Kevin to surface for air. Kevin's screams had alerted other travelers on the riverbank, but no rescue was possible once the crocodile had seized him. The massive reptile dragged Kevin into deeper water, where the death roll continued until his struggles ceased. The entire attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but the crocodile's grip never loosened. The crocodile disappeared beneath the murky water with Kevin's body, carrying its prey toward the deeper pools where it would cache the remains until ready to feed. Kevin's backpack and clothing were found on the riverbank, but his body was never recovered despite extensive search efforts by local authorities. The investigation revealed that Kevin had ignored multiple warnings about crocodile dangers and had entered the water while intoxicated. His death prompted the lodge to implement stricter security measures and better enforcement of river safety rules. But the tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of treating African wildlife as entertainment. Kevin's death became a cautionary tale shared among backpacker communities about the importance of respecting local warnings and the deadly reality of African predators. His social media accounts, filled with increasingly dangerous stunts, served as a reminder of how the pursuit of thrills could lead to fatal consequences. Still, adventure tourists weren't the only people who found themselves in deadly encounters with African wildlife. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a volunteer's dedication to conservation would lead to a tragic miscalculation with one of our closest evolutionary relatives. It was February 19, 2013, and the mist-shrouded mountains of Virunga National Park provided sanctuary for some of the world's last remaining mountain gorillas. Catherine Williams had been volunteering with a gorilla conservation program for 4 months, working to protect these magnificent creatures from poaching and habitat destruction. The 26-year-old veterinary student from Vancouver had developed a deep emotional connection to the gorilla families she helped monitor, often staying late at the research station to observe their behavior. Catherine Williams had always dreamed of working with endangered species, choosing veterinary medicine specifically to pursue a career in wildlife conservation. Her volunteer position at Virunga represented the culmination of years of study and preparation, offering hands-on experience with one of the world's most endangered primates. Catherine's dedication to her work was evident in her willingness to extend her volunteer period and take on additional responsibilities beyond her original assignment. The conservation program where Catherine worked focused on monitoring gorilla health and behavior while protecting them from the constant threat of poaching. The work required researchers to maintain close contact with habituated gorilla families, observing their daily activities and documenting any signs of illness or injury. Catherine had been assigned to work with a family group led by a large silverback male who had been showing signs of respiratory illness. That morning, Catherine was conducting a routine health assessment of the gorilla family when she noticed that the silverback's condition appeared to be worsening. The massive male was showing signs of lethargy and had been coughing frequently, symptoms that could indicate a serious respiratory infection that might spread to other members of the group. Mountain gorillas are incredibly powerful primates, with adult silverbacks weighing up to 440 pounds and possessing strength estimated at 10 times that of an adult human. Despite their generally peaceful nature, gorillas can become extremely dangerous when they feel threatened or are protecting their family group. Silverbacks are particularly aggressive when ill or stressed, as their leadership role requires them to defend their group against any perceived threats. Their massive hands, powerful arms, and large canine teeth make them capable of inflicting fatal injuries even without malicious intent. Catherine's concern for the silverback's health led her to approach closer than normal protocol allowed, hoping to get a better assessment of his breathing patterns and overall condition. She had worked with this particular family for months and believed she understood their individual personalities and tolerance levels, but illness had made the silverback unpredictable and more aggressive than usual. As Catherine moved within the silverback's personal space to observe his breathing, the massive gorilla interpreted her approach as a threat to his weakened condition and his family's safety. Gorillas communicate through body language and territorial displays, but Catherine's focus on his medical condition caused her to miss the warning signs that should have prompted her to retreat. The silverback's attack was sudden and devastating, his massive hands grabbing Catherine and pulling her to the ground, while his powerful arms delivered crushing blows to her head and torso. The gorilla's incredible strength made resistance impossible as he continued his assault, his protective instincts driving him to eliminate what he perceived as a threat to his family. Catherine's screams echoed through the forest, alerting her colleagues who were working with other gorilla groups in the area. They arrived to find the silverback still attacking Catherine, his violent behavior preventing them from immediately intervening to help their colleague. The researchers eventually managed to drive the gorilla away using noise and distraction techniques, but Catherine had already sustained fatal injuries from the prolonged attack. The remote mountain location meant that medical evacuation would take hours, and Catherine died from massive trauma before help could arrive. The investigation revealed that Catherine had violated safety protocols by approaching too close to an ill and stressed silverback without proper backup from other researchers. Her death led to revised safety guidelines for gorilla research and highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild gorilla behavior, even among animals that had been habituated to human presence. Catherine's tragic death served as a reminder that even the most dedicated conservationists could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of wild animals, and that emotional connections to wildlife could lead to dangerous lapses in judgment. Her story became a cautionary tale within the conservation community about the importance of maintaining professional distance and following safety protocols when working with potentially dangerous species. It was April 3, 2017, in Thoiry, France. Inside the Thoiry Zoo Safari Park, the wolf sector adjacent to the bison paddock, meant to mimic the wild stillness of Yellowstone, seemed calm. Yet within the shadows of its pines, something alive and waiting stirred, a quiet rhythm of movement that would soon break that silence for good. Camille Morel was 29, a fitness instructor from Versailles who lived by routine. Known among her clients for her precision and self-discipline, She maintained the same training schedule no matter where she was. After 6 months of non-stop classes at her studio, she decided to spend a weekend at the Thoiry Zoo Safari, one of the few places near Paris offering guests an overnight wilderness immersion without leaving the country. It wasn't her first visit. She'd stayed once before and remembered the tranquility of waking to animal sounds instead of traffic. She booked the chalet not just for rest, but to keep her running habit intact in the open air. To friends, Camille's decision made sense. The park's trails and guest roads were well marked and safe during visiting hours. She'd read the safety pamphlet about restricted areas and believed her familiarity with the grounds made her cautious enough. Her chalet overlooked the fenced wolf sector adjacent to the bison range, a layout designed to reduce mixed-species stress and liability during guest drives. The animals were separated by natural barriers and double-fenced zones, and guests were told the viewing area was completely secure. Camille trusted the system. Her goal that morning was simple, a quick 2-mile jog before breakfast, the same as she did every morning at home. The zoo's landscape was a strange fusion of natural calm and controlled wilderness, pine trees in neat clusters, sandy trails, and an artificial stream running through the lowlands. At dawn, the service road and the inner track appeared nearly identical, a known issue in drive-through parks, where early light flattens contrast. Beyond the chalet's edge stretched a gravel service road used by rangers and tour jeeps. The wolves' territory extended across nearly 20 acres of wooded ground. Gray wolves, the largest of the canids, can weigh over 100 pounds and run up to 35 miles per hour for short bursts. Pack behavior revolves around cooperation and hierarchy. Most attacks on humans occur only when the animals feel threatened, cornered, or see unusual movement that triggers pursuit. In captivity, stress or broken boundaries can alter those instincts. That morning, a scheduled maintenance check had delayed some of the park's early operations. Workers had opened an internal service gate near the chalet to move a small utility vehicle through. Overnight frost had iced the latch mechanism, preventing full engagement of the double lock, and when one of the workers received a call about a mechanical issue elsewhere, he left under maintenance override without confirming it was secure. The gate's interlock was meant to be re-engaged once staff passed, a step that failed. Around 7 a.m., Camille stepped outside with her phone and a small water bottle. She jogged down the gravel path that bordered the guest area. Seeing no posted warning signs from that angle, she assumed it looped safely back toward the perimeter trail. By 7:20, she was nearly half a mile in. The road dipped slightly, flanked by pine trunks and open brush. It was then that she unknowingly crossed into the wolf enclosure. The wolves had been fed the previous evening but remained alert and active after a cold night. 3 of them, the dominant male and 2 subordinates, were near the northern edge, restless from the scent of human movement. From the observation tower overlooking part of the enclosure, a zookeeper scanning the area noticed the lone jogger and radioed for confirmation that the route was clear. Seconds later, he realized she was inside the enclosure. He shouted into the radio for a patrol, but before the words were answered, movement broke the calm below. At first, the wolves didn't charge. They emerged from the trees, low to the ground, tails stiff, heads aligned. Camille slowed, confused by their presence but not immediately panicked. She'd seen them before behind fences and thought the barrier must be nearby. When they began advancing in a slow, deliberate arc, the shift in posture made her freeze. She turned, saw the empty stretch of gravel behind her, and started jogging back, faster this time. The wolves matched her pace, then accelerated, paws thudding against the dirt. She broke into a sprint. The zookeeper watching from above saw Camille glance back once to the wolves. Near a drainage trench, her foot caught on the uneven gravel, and she fell forward, hitting hard. Before she could push herself up, the lead wolf clamped down on her right thigh, pulling backward with a violent jerk. She twisted, trying to kick free, but another wolf lunged at her shoulder. Her scream carried across the enclosure, high and ragged. The zookeeper in the tower sounded the alarm and radioed the rangers. The response vehicle was rerouted around the inner fence lines, delaying arrival to just under 10 minutes, within normal range for a keeper-initiated emergency call. 2 more wolves joined, surrounding her as she tried to crawl toward the ditch. The lead wolf released and regripped higher, its teeth sinking into her hip. She struck out with her hands, scraping the gravel, trying to push herself forward, but one of the animals bit into her arm, shaking until it tore free. Within moments, she was on her back, thrashing as the pack pulled from opposite sides. She kicked weakly once more, then went still. Rangers arrived within 10 minutes in a vehicle. They found the wolves clustered over Camille's body, heads low and jaws working. Warning shots sent the pack scattering into the trees. 2 rangers approached as another called for a tranquilizer team. Camille lay on her side, clothing torn, deep bites from shoulder to thigh. 1 ranger checked for a pulse and found none. They covered her with a thermal blanket and secured the area until all 5 wolves were sedated. An autopsy confirmed death by exsanguination, massive blood loss due to multiple deep lacerations and crushing trauma to the limbs. The body was transported under escort to Versailles that afternoon. Camille's family filed a civil lawsuit against the Fearsome Safari and its parent company, alleging gross negligence and breach of safety protocol. After a year of investigation and hearings, the court ruled in favor of the family. The park quietly settled without appeal. Following the incident, a criminal negligence inquiry and an independent enclosure audit were conducted. Fearsome Safari implemented procedural retrofits, installing interlocks and alarms that trigger if any gate remains unlatched for more than 15 seconds. It was February 9, 2014, near La Ronge, Saskatchewan. The morning light came slow through the northern boreal forest. For 2 men setting out that day, it seemed like another routine trip into familiar woods. But without warning, it would turn into something neither had imagined possible. David Lasky was 45, a part-time wildlife photographer who lived just outside Prince Albert with his wife and teenage son. He'd spent years tracking animal behavior through remote cameras, learning to move silently and read patterns in snow. Photography was both his passion and side income. His real job was at a lumber supply store, but weekends were for the woods. His cousin Jeff, 42, often joined him on winter runs to retrieve SD cards from trail cams. They had grown up hunting and fishing together, though neither carried a firearm anymore. That weekend, after a light snowfall, late-season hunger had made local deer scarce, and David wanted to check a set of cameras he'd left by a frozen creek north of Waskiesiu Lake. They'd heard distant howls before, never close, and David believed wolves avoided humans by instinct. The plan was simple: a 2-hour ride by snowmobile, a short hike to the cameras, and back before dusk. Wolves in the region were typically gray, thick-coated animals averaging about 90 pounds. They moved in tight family groups of 4 to 8. Their strength lay in coordination, silent pursuit, strategic circling, and patience rather than outright speed. Under normal conditions, they avoided people entirely, focusing on deer and moose along the forest edges. The men dressed in insulated gear and carried only a single red flare for safety. By 9:30 a.m., they parked their snowmobile near the creek and began walking the last half-mile through packed snow, their breath hanging in the still air. At first, everything was normal. They reached the first camera, brushed off the lens, and swapped the SD card. Around 10:15, as they crossed the creek, Jeff's boots slipped on a patch of crusted but solid ice from recent thaw-freeze cycles. David crouched to help him up, steadying his cousin by the arm. That was when both noticed faint movement among the tree line across the creek. The animals stood still at first, only their eyes catching light. Jeff straightened and waved his arms, shouting to scare them off. The wolves didn't run. Unbeknownst to the men, a freshly killed deer lay half-buried in snow about 20 yards behind the tree line, a cached carcass the wolves had dragged there the night before. The pack was food-stressed, defending the cache rather than hunting. They began to fan out slowly, forming a loose semicircle. David muttered that they were just curious, that noise would drive them away, but even as he spoke, one of the wolves lowered its head and started advancing. The men began backing up the slope toward their snowmobile, moving quickly but without turning. The wolves followed, quiet and steady. Then the first lunge came. A gray blur crossed the ice, jaws clamping onto the back of David's leg. The impact drove him face first into the snow. Jeff spun and reached for the flare, but his gloves fumbled with the cap. 2 more wolves broke from the trees, bounding fast, their paws sending up bursts of white powder. David tried to kick free, leaving streaks of blood against the snow. He managed to roll onto his back and swing an arm, hitting one wolf across the muzzle with his camera bag. But another struck from the side, teeth finding his shoulder. Jeff finally snapped the flare to life, the red flame hissing. He swung it toward the animals. One wolf snarled and darted back, fur singed along its flank, but the others held ground. David was on his knees now, one hand pressed to his thigh, blood pumping dark and fast through his fingers. He tried to rise, but his leg gave out beneath him. Jeff charged forward with the flare, yelling, waving it more aggressively. The heat drove them back momentarily, circling just out of reach. David slumped sideways, panting, his breath coming shallow. The flare burned steady, hissing in Jeff's hand as he swung it in wide arcs, forcing the wolves to hesitate. They retreated into the trees, growling low as they vanished from sight. Jeff pressed on his cousin's wound, but it was too deep. Within a minute, the movement stopped. He pulled David's camera bag close and used his phone to call for help. Reception cut in and out, but a faint, intermittent signal reached a nearby ranger station. Authorities arrived about 40 minutes later by snowmobile. They found Jeff sitting beside the body, shaking uncontrollably. Wolf tracks surrounded the site in a broad ring, with drag marks leading back toward the tree line and the cached deer carcass. The official report listed cause of death as exsanguination from femoral artery trauma, consistent with large animal bites. Provincial conservation officers, assisted by federal wildlife agents, closed the area within the hour. Samples were taken from bite margins for DNA analysis, and the implicated pack was later trapped and relocated to a remote management zone north of Reindeer Lake. It was November 15, 2016, in the remote forests of Primorsky Krai, eastern Russia. Snow fell in a steady veil, muting the usual sounds of the taiga. Nikolai Baranov's radio had been silent since morning. The last check-in, brief and routine, gave no hint that by evening his route would end in silence and blood. Nikolai was 52 and had spent most of his life in these forests. A forestry worker by trade, he managed patrols in the buffer zones near the Sikhoty Alin Mountains, where he monitored traps, logging boundaries, and poaching activity. He lived alone in a small settlement near Dalnaryshensk, his routine built around the forest's rhythms. That week, he had been assigned to survey a hunting reserve, following reports of wolves pushing closer to villages. He rode out before dawn on his snowmobile, a canvas bag packed with bread, tea, a hand axe, and flares. Colleagues said he often preferred working solo. He claimed a second engine just scared off wildlife. That day's assignment was simple. Document animal tracks after the first full snow. Wolves had been increasingly active, driven from higher ground after a collapse in wild boar numbers. Wolves here could travel up to 20 miles in a single night, driven by hunger across frozen ground and sparse woodland. Their diets shifted with the season: deer in autumn, carrion or smaller mammals in the hard months of winter. When deep cold set in and prey vanished beneath ice or snow, instinct sometimes blurred into desperation. A human scent, faint and unfamiliar, might still trigger the same ancient reflex: to follow, test, and close the distance. Locals warned of animals following sled trails at dusk. Nikolai heard the same warnings at the station that morning, but didn't take them seriously. He had checked his flare gun but left his rifle behind, citing its weight and his short route. By noon, weather had shifted fast, gusting snow and dropping visibility. His supervisor made several radio attempts that went unanswered, assuming battery failure from the cold. When evening came and Nikolai still hadn't returned, Yevgeny, a neighboring ranger and longtime friend, prepared to follow his route before dark. Yevgeny rode out around 5 p.m., with a flashlight mounted on his snowmobile and a sidearm holstered under his coat. Tracks were faint but visible, a single snowmobile line winding north, then stopping abruptly about 800 meters from the ridge. There, the engine was half buried in snow, its headlights still faintly glowing. Prints showed that Nikolai had dismounted, perhaps to clear ice from the track. Around the site, another pattern emerged: paw marks, deep and overlapping, circling. The snow bore drag lines, evidence of pacing. Then, the circle tightened. From that point, the scene unfolded through what Yevgeny later described as a sequence of struggle. Human footprints turned erratic, moving backward. Closer inspection revealed a snapped branch at chest height and a torn glove 10 feet away. A smear of blood marked the snowmobile's side panel. 30 feet beyond, the snow showed clear impressions of multiple bodies pressing down, wolves and man. The wolves had likely approached silently, using the cover of snowfall and wind. Initial bites were to the legs, pulling him down. Blood spray against nearby birch bark indicated arterial injury within seconds. As the attack progressed, the evidence suggested coordinated movement. Bite patterns indicated coordinated restraint from multiple angles. His jacket was shredded along the spine, showing where one animal had clamped onto his back while another tore at the neck. Boot prints ended mid-stride, replaced by drag marks. Yevgeny followed them cautiously, revolver drawn, the forest unnervingly still. He found the body 30 meters downhill near a frozen stream. The snow around it was flattened and red. The wolves had likely fed briefly before retreating. Later investigations showed that the surrounding prints showed at least 4 individuals, 2 larger adults, 2 smaller juveniles. Yevgeny radioed the base immediately. It took nearly an hour for a snow vehicle from the nearest post to arrive, by which time darkness had swallowed the clearing. The men lifted the body onto a tarp, careful not to disturb the bite patterns for analysis. The stench of blood lingered even in the cold. The pack didn't return, but distant howls echoed as the rescuers secured the area. Nikolai's remains were taken to Dalnarechynsk for examination. Autopsy confirmed catastrophic blood loss, with multiple punctures to major vessels and crushing trauma to the neck vertebrae consistent with a fatal bite. Time of death was estimated shortly after the onset of the attack. The official report listed predatory behavior exacerbated by winter scarcity. Specialists noted that 2016 saw an unusual decline in prey density across the region. The incident received a single mention on regional news, framed as a tragic encounter during severe weather. There was no footage, only photographs from the recovery team that were never released publicly. It was May 21st, 2018, in Gran Paradiso National Park, northern Italy. The small expedition of 4 had finished dinner beside a dying fire, leaving 1 storage bag unsealed near the cooking area. Giovanni Russo, 38, had worked these slopes for over a decade. A certified alpine guide, he and his wife, Elena, led small trekking tours for tourists seeking an authentic mountain night. Giovanni was regarded by peers as practical and even-tempered, someone who knew when to turn back and when to press on. He'd grown up in Aosta and spent most of his adult life navigating the same valleys where his father once herded sheep. The Gran Paradiso region had become a renewed focal point for conservation. Wolves had returned after decades of absence, a fact Giovanni respected but didn't fear. He saw himself as part of that balance between humans and wildlife. The couple's guiding company specialized in remote routes with minimal disturbance, and Giovanni often told clients that predators avoided people. The trek that weekend was routine, a mild ascent, and one night at a designated campsite near the meadow of Alpmoney. His clients, a pair of mid-aged hikers from Milan, had little experience in backcountry settings but trusted the couple completely. That night, one of them had left a pack of trail mix open near the fire pit, and scraps from dinner were tossed into the same area. Wolves in this region averaged between 60 and 70 pounds, with lean gray coats blending into the forest. Normally nocturnal, they hunted red deer and chamois, working in coordinated packs. But in recent years, rangers had observed bolder juveniles venturing closer to human camps, especially when food waste was left accessible. Just before dawn, around 4 a.m., Elena woke to soft rustling, first near the cooking area, then a faint growl, low and uncertain. She thought it was a fox at first, until she saw several silhouettes clustered around the fire pit, where the unsealed food bag now lay torn open. She whispered for Giovanni, who unzipped his sleeping bag and grabbed his flashlight. He stepped outside alone, the cold air hitting his face as he walked 10, maybe 50 feet toward the food zone. The beam of his flashlight caught 3 wolves standing over scattered wrappers and crumbs. He shouted and waved his light, but they didn't scatter. One stepped forward, hackles raised, its paws firm on the ground. Giovanni shouted again, clapping his hands. When he took another step forward, closing distance, the older female lunged, nipping at his forearm in a defensive snap. Giovanni jerked back, but the young one followed through, clamping down near his elbow. The bite struck deep, severing tissue near the carotid and vertebral area when he twisted to pull free, a rare but catastrophic injury. He fell backward, blood pulsed through his injuries. The wolves held their ground, uncertain now, circling the dropped food bag. Elena tore from the tent with a burning stick from the fire pit. The clients, frozen inside their shelter, saw Giovanni collapsed on the ground, blood pooling around his collar. Elena screamed and swung the torch, striking one of the juveniles across the flank. It yelped and retreated into the dark. The rest scattered after a final low growl, vanishing toward the tree line. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands to the wound, whispering his name over and over. Giovanni's chest moved once more, then stopped. Because of the poor signal at that altitude, one client climbed several meters up a nearby slope to reach coverage. successfully contacting park emergency services. Rangers arrived at the campsite just before sunrise. Giovanni's body remained where it had fallen, partially covered by his wife's jacket. His face was intact, but the left side of his neck showed deep, crushing injuries. Investigators later determined the fatal wound likely occurred as Giovanni twisted while the wolf held his arm, a freak tear along the artery that caused near-instant collapse. Officials ruled the incident as a food-provoked escalation involving juveniles, noting that the wolves had been feeding near unsecured rations. A short-term monitoring and deterrence program followed, but no culling was ordered, as the pack showed no further boldness toward humans. It was September 3, 2013, near the Toklat River in Denali National Park, Alaska. By early afternoon, the wind had dropped, and the landscape stood still, open and silent. From a distance, it looked calm, a place where nothing could happen quickly, but the quiet there was deceptive. Sarah Miller, 26, was an experienced backpacker from Anchorage. She was known for her minimalist approach, carrying only what she trusted, relying on skill rather than gear. Her plan that week was to complete a 2-day loop near the Toklat River, timed to coincide with caribou migration, following a route where wolves were often observed trailing herds. She carried bear spray, a GPS beacon, and enough food for 2 nights. Solo travel didn't intimidate her. She'd done it for years, often documenting her routes for small hiking blogs. The Denali backcountry zones required permits, which she had properly filed. Rangers later recalled she had asked about late-season wolf movements, but showed no concern when told sightings had increased near the river corridor. Wolves had been following caribou herds migrating south, and fresh tracks had been noted days earlier. To Sarah, it was just part of the environment, one she respected but didn't fear. Wolves in this region averaged between 70 and 100 pounds, built for endurance and speed, capable of covering 40 miles in a day. Their jaws delivered a bite force of nearly 400 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bone. They rarely approached people living on caribou, hares, and ground squirrels, but when prey grew scarce, or human scent carried traces of food, curiosity sometimes lingered. That week, rangers had posted advisories near trailheads, noting that several hikers reported wolves trailing them at a distance. Sarah had likely read those postings when she signed out, though no record showed she changed her route. Her confidence in her precautions was understandable. Statistically, Denali's wolves avoided confrontation. At around 4 p.m., a passing tourist group in a vehicle on the park road spotted a lone figure standing on a gravel bar below the ridge. The hiker waved, later confirmed by clothing and timing to be Sarah, before continuing upstream toward the area where her camp was located. She reached her final GPS coordinates sometime before 4:45 p.m. The last photos on her recovered camera showed wide shots of the river valley and a small group of wolves following a caribou herd in the mid-distance. Tracks found later indicated she moved off the main gravel bar toward higher ground, likely planning to cut inland. The first sign of struggle began about half a mile from her tent. Her GPS unit recorded erratic movement, rapid looping, then a sudden stop. Investigators reconstructed what happened next through physical evidence and predator behavior analysis. The wolves had diverted toward her position once the herd passed out of sight. Sarah likely saw them at a distance, as she deployed her bear spray once. Residue was detected on nearby vegetation. Wind readings that afternoon showed a westward shift, causing partial blowback of the spray mist. It worked briefly, driving the wolves about 20 feet back before the cloud dispersed. They began to circle again, emboldened by the fading chemical scent. One flank of the group approached from behind, following her retreat up a shallow embankment. Handprints pressed deep into the soil showed she climbed in haste. Blood marks began at the top of the slope. One wolf had likely lunged first, grabbing her backpack or arm. The straps were torn clean through, consistent with a pulling force rather than a cut. A second wolf joined, aiming lower, its bite breaking the skin along her thigh. She tried to fight back. The spray canister lay spent beside her pack, but the group coordinated, one attacking from the rear, the others darting forward. The ground at the site was churned with soil and hair, suggesting several minutes of movement before she was forced down. Analysis of tissue marks later revealed crushing bites to the neck and shoulder consistent with a killing grip, the kind wolves use to suffocate large prey. Her jacket was shredded, and the torn sleeve recovered 20 feet away still held fragments of skin and fabric. Search efforts began that night, with both ground crews and a helicopter dispatched after rangers noted her vehicle unmoved. The aircraft spotted a disturbed patch of gravel near the Toklat Channel the next morning. Sarah's body lay partially covered by soil and debris, her left arm missing, likely carried off by scavengers after the attack. They collected the camera and other items for analysis, and later confirmed through timestamps that her final photograph was taken just 6 minutes before the estimated time of death. The park temporarily closed multiple backcountry zones along the migration corridor. Genetic sampling confirmed the wolves belonged to the Toklat pack. Investigators determined the attack began as a predatory test, or prey proxy response, that escalated fatally, but with no repeated approach or food-seeking behavior observed. No removals were ordered. At a private debrief, rangers explained the findings to Sarah's parents, who later issued a short statement urging that the park not punish what it protects.
It was March 15, 2014, when the golden African sun began to rise over the vast wilderness of Kruger National Park in South Africa. The morning air was crisp and filled with the sounds of awakening wildlife as the savanna stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with ancient baobab trees and thorny acacia bushes. This pristine landscape, home to Africa's most dangerous predators, would become the final destination for Rebecca Whitman, a 28-year-old wildlife photographer from Denver, Colorado. Rebecca had arrived in South Africa 2 weeks earlier on a self-funded expedition to build her portfolio for National Geographic submissions. Known among her peers for her fearless approach to wildlife photography, she specialized in capturing intimate moments with Africa's most dangerous animals. Her freelance career depended on getting shots that others wouldn't dare attempt, often pushing the boundaries of safety to achieve the perfect frame. Local park rangers had repeatedly warned her about venturing too close to predator territories. But Rebecca's determination to capture award-winning images often overrode their cautionary advice. She had been growing increasingly frustrated with the distant shots she was getting from her vehicle, believing that truly spectacular photographs required taking calculated risks. Her camping permit allowed her to stay in the designated areas for extended periods, giving her multiple opportunities to study animal behavior patterns and identify the best photographic opportunities. African lions are apex predators weighing up to 420 pounds, capable of reaching speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. These magnificent cats possess night vision 6 times better than humans and can detect movement from over a mile away. Their powerful jaws generate a bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can grow up to 1.5 inches long. Lions are opportunistic hunters that typically feed during dawn and dusk, making early morning one of the most dangerous times to encounter them on foot. Male lions are particularly territorial and aggressive when protecting their pride's kill from scavengers or perceived threats. At 5:45 a.m., Rebecca made her fatal mistake by leaving her vehicle to track a pride of lions on foot, directly violating park regulations. She had discovered a fresh zebra kill and positioned herself behind a large termite mound approximately 40 yards from where the pride was feeding. Her camera equipment was set up perfectly to capture the lions in their natural feeding behavior. As she adjusted her telephoto lens, the camera's motor drive made a soft mechanical clicking sound that immediately caught the attention of a massive male lion who had just finished eating. The 400-pound male's head snapped toward Rebecca's position, his amber eyes locking onto her location with predatory focus. Rebecca froze behind her viewfinder, continuing to photograph as the lion began stalking toward her in a low, deliberate crouch. His powerful muscles rippled beneath his golden coat as he moved with deadly precision through the tall grass, covering ground silently with each calculated step. The lion's ears were pinned forward, his tail twitching with anticipation as he closed the distance between himself and what he perceived as a threat to his pride's meal. When the lion reached 15 yards from Rebecca's position, he suddenly exploded into a full charge with devastating speed. Rebecca attempted to retreat but stumbled backward over her camera bag, falling helplessly to the ground. The massive cat launched himself through the air, striking her chest with both front paws and driving her flat against the hard earth. His razor-sharp claws, each nearly 2 inches long, penetrated deep into her torso, puncturing through her ribs and into her lung cavity. The lion's powerful jaws immediately clamped down on Rebecca's throat with crushing force. His 4-inch canine teeth punctured through her carotid artery and windpipe simultaneously, causing massive hemorrhaging and cutting off her air supply. The lion's bite completely crushed her trachea while his claws continued raking across her chest and abdomen, opening deep lacerations that exposed her internal organs. Rebecca's body convulsed violently as blood loss and asphyxiation occurred simultaneously, her cardiovascular system failing rapidly under the massive trauma. Within 2 minutes, all movement had ceased. The lion maintained his grip on her throat for several more seconds before releasing his hold and beginning to feed. He started with her abdominal area, using his powerful jaws and sharp teeth to tear through flesh and consume the soft tissue organs. The feeding continued for over an hour, before the lion rejoined his pride at the original zebra kill. Park rangers discovered Rebecca's abandoned camera equipment 2 days later, leading to an extensive search that eventually located her partially consumed remains 200 yards from her original position. The investigation concluded that she had violated multiple park safety regulations by leaving her vehicle and approaching dangerous wildlife on foot. Her death sparked renewed discussions about photographer safety protocols in African National Park. It was August 22, 2016, when the sun hung high over the pristine waterways of the Okavango Delta in Botswana, casting shimmering reflections across the maze of channels that snake through this UNESCO World Heritage Site. The delta's crystal-clear waters were deceptively calm, hiding one of Africa's most dangerous predators beneath their tranquil surface. This aquatic paradise, where papyrus reeds sway gently in the breeze and colorful kingfishers dart between lily pads, would become the final destination for Taylor McKinney, a 31-year-old investment banker from Chicago, Illinois. Taylor had arrived in Botswana with his new wife Sarah for their dream honeymoon, a 2-week luxury safari adventure through some of Africa's most spectacular wilderness areas. Known among his friends for his competitive swimming background and overconfident attitude around water, Taylor often took unnecessary risks to impress others, especially his bride. The couple had booked an exclusive Makoko safari, traveling through the delta's narrow channels in traditional dugout canoes guided by local experts. Their experienced guide had repeatedly warned them about the crocodile-infested waters and emphasized the critical importance of never entering the water under any circumstances. The delta's intricate network of channels and lagoons provided perfect hunting grounds for Nile crocodiles, and the guide's warnings carried the weight of decades of experience in these treacherous waters. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most formidable predators, capable of growing up to 20 feet in length and weighing over 1,500 pounds. These ancient reptiles possess one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom, generating up to 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their powerful jaws contain 64 to 68 sharp canonical teeth designed for gripping and tearing flesh. Crocodiles are ambush predators that can remain motionless underwater for up to an hour, perfectly camouflaged against the muddy bottom. When they strike, they can accelerate from 0 to 25 miles per hour in a single explosive burst, making escape virtually impossible for their victims. At 6:30 p.m., as the golden hour light painted the delta in warm hues, Taylor made his fatal mistake. Sarah's expensive camera had slipped from their Makoko and sunk into 4 feet of murky water in a narrow channel. Despite their guide's urgent warnings and Sarah's pleas, Taylor dove into the crocodile-infested waters to retrieve the camera. The recent rains had stirred up sediment, limiting underwater visibility to less than 2 feet. Taylor's confident swimming strokes and splashing movements created vibrations that traveled through the water, alerting every predator in the vicinity to his presence. A massive 14-foot Nile crocodile had been lying motionless on the channel bottom, perfectly camouflaged among the fallen logs and debris. The 800-pound reptile had been waiting patiently for prey when Taylor's disturbance triggered its predatory instincts. As Taylor dove down searching for the camera, his legs kicking frantically in the murky water, the crocodile began its approach from directly below. The ancient predator moved with deadly precision, its powerful tail propelling it upward through the water column. The crocodile struck with devastating force, its massive jaws clamping down on Taylor's left leg just above the knee. The crushing bite force of 3,700 pounds per square inch instantly shattered his femur and crushed the surrounding muscle tissue. Taylor's scream was cut short as the crocodile immediately initiated its infamous death roll, a hunting technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. The massive reptile spun rapidly in the water, twisting Taylor's body like a rag doll while maintaining its bone-crushing grip. The violent rotation snapped Taylor's femur completely and dislocated his hip joint within the first 3 rolls. His body was dragged deeper underwater with each spin, and the muddy water quickly turned crimson with blood from his catastrophic injuries. The crocodile's serrated teeth acted like saw blades, tearing through muscle, tendons, and blood vessels as it continued its relentless death roll. After 6 complete rotations, the reptile's teeth had severed Taylor's femoral artery, causing massive hemorrhaging that clouded the water in a spreading pool of red. Water rushed into Taylor's lungs as he was held underwater, his body spinning helplessly in the crocodile's grip. The combination of drowning, massive blood loss, and traumatic shock caused his cardiovascular system to fail rapidly. Within 3 minutes, all movement had ceased. The crocodile maintained its grip for several more seconds before dragging Taylor's lifeless body toward deeper water, where it disappeared beneath the surface to begin feeding in the safety of its underwater lair. Botswana wildlife authorities launched an extensive search and recovery operation, but Taylor's remains were never found despite days of intensive efforts. The investigation concluded that he had ignored explicit safety warnings and entered dangerous waters during peak crocodile activity hours. His death prompted renewed safety protocols for Makoko operations throughout the Delta, with stricter enforcement of water entry prohibitions. It was June 8, 2017, when the morning sun cast long shadows across the endless golden grasslands of the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya. The vast savanna stretched to the horizon, punctuated by scattered acacia trees and rocky outcroppings that provided shelter for countless species of African wildlife. This iconic landscape, where the great wildebeest migration thunders across ancient plains, would become the final destination for Olivia Harrington, a 22-year-old recent college graduate from Portland, Oregon. Olivia had traveled to Kenya with 3 college friends to celebrate their graduation, embarking on what they believe would be the adventure of a lifetime. As a pre-veterinary student passionate about wildlife conservation, she had dreamed of experiencing Africa's magnificent animals in their natural habitat. Known among her friends for her impulsive nature and desire to get close to wildlife for the perfect photograph, Olivia often acted on emotion rather than caution. The group had booked a budget camping safari with minimal professional supervision. Their local guides had repeatedly explained the extreme danger of approaching lions, especially during the early morning hours when these apex predators were most active. African lions are the undisputed rulers of the savanna, with adult females weighing up to 280 pounds and possessing incredible speed and agility. These apex predators can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts and leap distances of up to 36 feet. Their powerful jaws generate a bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can extend up to 1.5 inches in length. Lionesses are particularly dangerous when protecting cubs, as their maternal instincts override all other considerations, making them willing to attack any perceived threat regardless of size. At 6:15 a.m., as the Kenyan sunrise painted the grasslands in shades of golden amber, Olivia spotted a lioness with two small cubs resting beneath a large acacia tree. The scene appeared peaceful and photogenic, exactly the type of intimate wildlife moment she had traveled thousands of miles to capture. Against the urgent protest of her three friends who remained safely by their safari vehicle, Olivia approached on foot with her camera, determined to get close-up shots of the cubs for her wildlife photography portfolio. The 280-pound lioness immediately recognized the approaching threat and stood to position herself between Olivia and her vulnerable offspring. At 30 yards distance, the lioness began displaying unmistakable signs of aggression. Her ears flattened against her skull, her tail lashed violently from side to side, and low, rumbling growls emanated from deep within her chest. These were clear warning signals that any experienced guide would have recognized as an immediate call to retreat. But Olivia continued advancing, focused entirely on capturing the perfect shot through her camera viewfinder. When Olivia reached 20 yards from the cubs, the lioness's protective instincts overrode any remaining tolerance. Without further warning, she launched into a devastating charge, her powerful muscles propelling her across the distance at maximum speed. The lioness covered the 20-yard gap in less than 3 seconds, reaching her top speed of 35 miles per hour as she closed in on what she perceived as a mortal threat to her cubs. Olivia turned to flee but managed only 4 desperate steps before the lioness struck her from behind with tremendous force. The cat's front paws, each weighing over 30 pounds, hit Olivia's back like sledgehammers, driving her face first into the hard-packed earth with bone-crushing impact. The lioness's razor-sharp claws, extended to their full 1.5-inch length, raked across Olivia's spine, tearing through her clothing and flesh to reach the vertebrae beneath. The lioness's powerful jaws immediately clamped down on the back of Olivia's neck, her 4-inch canine teeth penetrating through skin, muscle, and into the cervical spine. The crushing bite force of 650 pounds per square inch instantly fractured the C3 vertebra, severing Olivia's spinal cord and causing immediate paralysis from the neck down. The lioness shook her massive head violently from side to side, causing catastrophic damage to the surrounding tissue and blood vessels. The violent shaking motion tore through Olivia's carotid arteries and jugular veins, causing massive hemorrhaging that quickly pooled beneath her motionless body. Her cardiovascular system began failing rapidly as blood pressure dropped to critical levels. Within 4 minutes, cardiac arrest occurred due to the combination of spinal cord trauma, massive blood loss, and shock. The lioness maintained her grip for several more minutes before releasing her hold. After confirming that Olivia posed no further danger to her cubs, the lioness began feeding on the soft tissue areas, starting with the abdominal region. Her friends, who had fled to their vehicle in terror, waited 45 minutes before the lioness and her cubs moved away from the scene, allowing them to approach and discover Olivia's partially consumed remains. Kenyan wildlife authorities conducted a thorough investigation that concluded Olivia had violated fundamental safari safety protocols by approaching dangerous wildlife on foot. Her death prompted renewed emphasis on tourist education programs throughout Kenya's national parks. It was October 14th, 2018, when the African sun began its descent toward the horizon over the vast plains of Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. The golden grasslands stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with scattered acacia trees and rocky hope trees that served as vantage points for the park's apex predators. As twilight approached, the sounds of the African wilderness grew more intense, signaling the beginning of the nocturnal hunting period. This legendary landscape would become the final destination for Stephanie Rowland, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher from Austin, Texas. Stephanie had traveled to Tanzania with her husband Mark and their 2 children, ages 8 and 10, on what was meant to be an educational safari adventure. Known for her protective maternal instincts and hands-on teaching approach, she had spent months planning this trip to give her children a real-world education about African wildlife. The family had booked a guided camping safari that allowed them to experience the wilderness more intimately. Their experienced guide had repeatedly emphasized the critical importance of staying near their vehicle at all times, especially during dawn and dusk when lions are most active. African lions are the ultimate nocturnal predators, with adult females weighing up to 300 pounds and possessing extraordinary night vision that is 6 times more sensitive than human eyesight. These apex predators hunt primarily during twilight and nighttime hours, using coordinated pack tactics perfected over thousands of years. Their powerful jaws generate a crushing bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can extend up to 1.5 inches in length. Lions are capable of moving completely silently through tall grass, making them virtually undetectable until the moment they strike, at 7:45 p.m. As darkness settled over the Serengeti, Stephanie made her fatal mistake. She left the safety of their campsite to use the designated bathroom located 100 yards away from their tents. The sun had set 30 minutes earlier, and visibility was severely limited in the fading twilight. Despite her husband's concerns, Stephanie walked confidently along the familiar path, having made this same trip several times without incident. A pride of lions have been hunting in the area throughout the evening, and the scent of humans from the nearby campsite had attracted their attention. 2 lionesses had positioned themselves strategically along the path, using the tall grass and scattered bushes as perfect camouflage. Their golden coats blended seamlessly with the dried savanna grass, making them virtually invisible in the dim light. Stephanie was 50 yards from the bathroom facilities when she heard rustling in the grass to her left. She stopped and peered into the darkness, unable to see the 300-pound lioness crouched just 15 yards away. The predator had been tracking her scent and movement for several minutes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Stephanie turned to continue walking, the lioness detected the movement and prepared to attack. The second lioness had circled around behind Stephanie, positioning herself for a coordinated assault. When Stephanie resumed walking, both cats moved simultaneously. The first lioness charged from the left side, covering the 15-yard distance in less than 2 seconds at full speed. Her powerful muscles propelled her through the air in a devastating leap that struck Stephanie in the torso with tremendous force. The impact knocked Stephanie sideways to the ground, and the lioness's razor-sharp claws immediately raked across her shoulder and neck area. The 4-inch claws penetrated deep into her flesh, severing major blood vessels and causing massive hemorrhaging. Before Stephanie could react, the second lioness arrived and seized her legs, preventing any possibility of escape. The first lioness repositioned her attack, clamping her powerful jaws down on Stephanie's throat with crushing force. Her 4-inch canine teeth punctured through skin and muscle, penetrating the carotid artery and jugular veins simultaneously. The bite force of 650 pounds per square inch completely crushed her windpipe, cutting off her air supply instantly. Both lionesses used their combined weight of 600 pounds to pin Stephanie's body completely to the ground. The first lioness maintained her grip on the throat while shaking her massive head from side to side, causing maximum damage to the vital structures in her neck. The violent shaking motion tore through muscle tissue, blood vessels, and nerve pathways, causing catastrophic trauma. Stephanie's cardiovascular system began failing rapidly as blood pressure dropped to critical levels due to the severed arteries. The combination of massive blood loss, crushed windpipe, and traumatic shock caused her to lose consciousness within 90 seconds. Cardiac arrest occurred shortly afterward as her body succumbed to the multiple traumatic injuries. The lioness immediately began feeding, starting with the soft abdominal area, They dragged portions of her body over 200 yards from the original attack site, scattering the remains across a wide area as they consumed their prey throughout the night. When Stephanie failed to return to camp, her family raised the alarm, and searchers were dispatched immediately. Tanzanian wildlife authorities conducted a comprehensive investigation that concluded she had violated fundamental safety protocols by traveling alone after dark during peak predator activity hours. Her death prompted stricter enforcement of campsite safety rules throughout Serengeti National Park. It was April 3rd, 2019. When the early morning sun cast shimmering reflections across the pristine waters surrounding Gansbai, South Africa, a coastal town renowned as the great white shark capital of the world. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its deep blue surface concealing one of nature's most formidable predators in the depths below. This legendary marine wilderness would become the final destination for Angela Corbett, a 29-year-old travel blogger and social media influencer from Los Angeles, California. Angela had arrived in South Africa as part of her solo African wildlife documentation project, traveling alone to maintain complete creative control over her content. Known among her 50,000 Instagram followers for taking extreme risks to capture unique footage, she had built her brand on increasingly dangerous adventures that pushed safety boundaries. Her freelance career depended entirely on generating viral content that would maintain audience engagement and attract lucrative sponsorship deals. Angela had booked an exclusive shark cage diving expedition with one of Gansbai's premier operators. The dive operators had conducted a comprehensive safety briefing, repeatedly emphasizing the absolute importance of remaining inside the protective steel cage at all times while underwater. Great white sharks are the ocean's ultimate apex predator, capable of growing up to 20 feet in length and weighing over 5,000 pounds. These ancient killing machines possess rows of razor-sharp triangular teeth that can exert a bite force of up to 4,000 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to crush bone and tear through flesh with devastating efficiency. Their torpedo-shaped bodies are perfectly designed for explosive bursts of speed, allowing them to accelerate from 0 to 25 miles per hour in seconds when attacking prey. Great whites possess extraordinary sensory capabilities, including the ability to detect electrical fields and trace amounts of blood in the water from miles away. At 10:30 a.m., as the dive boat reached the prime great white territory near Seal Island, Angela made her fatal mistake. After 20 minutes of filming through the protective cage bars, she decided that the footage wasn't dramatic enough for her social media audience. Despite frantic signals from the dive master and horrified protests of other divers, Angela opened the cage door and swam out into open water with her waterproof camera, determined to capture unprotected footage of the circling sharks. Multiple great white sharks ranging from 12 to 16 feet in length had been attracted to the area by chum and seal decoys. A massive 15-foot female had been circling the cage for several minutes, displaying classic hunting behavior that experienced operators recognized as extremely dangerous. The shark's movements had become increasingly agitated and focused, indicating heightened predatory interest. Angela's erratic swimming movements and electrical signals generated by her camera equipment immediately triggered the shark's predatory response. The great white detected these abnormal patterns and identified Angela as potential prey, switching from curious investigation to active hunting mode. The shark began approaching from below, using the classic attack strategy that had made great whites the ocean's most feared predators. The great white struck Angela from below with tremendous force, its jaws opening to reveal multiple rows of triangular serrated teeth. The shark's mouth, measuring over 2 feet in width, clamped down on Angela's torso with crushing power. The initial bite force of 4,000 pounds per square inch instantly crushed her ribcage, puncturing both lungs and causing massive internal damage to her vital organs. The shark's razor-sharp teeth, each measuring up to 2.5 inches in length, penetrated deep into Angela's chest cavity, severing major blood vessels and causing catastrophic hemorrhaging. Her wetsuit provided no protection against the shark's bone-crushing bite, tearing like paper under the immense pressure. The great white's powerful jaws compressed her torso, fracturing multiple ribs and causing her sternum to collapse completely. Angela's body went into immediate traumatic shock as her cardiovascular system began failing rapidly. The shark maintained its grip for several seconds before releasing her briefly, only to attack again with even greater ferocity. The second bite targeted her legs and lower torso, the shark's teeth slicing through muscle, bone, and major arteries with surgical precision. Blood in the water immediately attracted 2 additional great whites to the feeding event, creating a frenzied attack that lasted several minutes. The sharks took turns attacking different parts of Angela's body, their powerful jaws systematically consuming flesh and limbs. Angela lost consciousness within 60 seconds due to massive blood loss and traumatic shock. The feeding frenzy continued for approximately 8 minutes before the sharks dispersed, leaving no recoverable remains. Angela's waterproof camera was found floating on the surface, its memory card containing the final footage of the shark's approach and initial strike before the recording ended abruptly. South African maritime authorities launched a comprehensive investigation, concluding that Angela had violated all established safety protocols by exiting the protective cage in shark-infested waters. Her death prompted immediate reviews of cage diving safety procedures throughout the region. Angela Corbett's tragedy demonstrated how the ocean's apex predator shows no mercy to those who venture beyond safety barriers. Her story marked the final chapter in a series of fatal wildlife encounters that shocked the safari community, each serving as a stark reminder of nature's unforgiving power when humans underestimate the deadly capabilities of the world's most dangerous predators.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen number.